My name is Mia. I am 21 years old. For 5 years, my parents charged me $800 a month to sleep in my own childhood bedroom. My father told me nothing in life is free. They watched me work 2 hospitality jobs, miss every high school milestone, and navigate icy mountain roads in a car with failing brakes just to meet their monthly payment. I handed over $48,000 in cash. I thought I was paying for shelter. I thought I was earning my family's respect. Then, on my 21st birthday, a local loan officer turned her computer monitor around. She showed me a municipal tax record that proved my everyday reality was a calculated theft. The house did not belong to my father. It belonged to me. It had belonged to me since I was 10 years old. Before we get into the fallout, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Orange Revenge. But only if this story speaks to you. Drop a comment and let me know how old you are right now. I want to know who is listening today. Now let me take you back to a sterile cubicle at a credit union in Boulder, Colorado, on the morning my childhood officially ended. I was sitting across a laminate desk from a loan officer named Julianne. I smelled like industrial bleach and old espresso, the lingering perfume of opening the bakery at dawn before rushing over here. My beat-up sedan had finally died that morning. The transmission gave out on the lower trails of the Flatirons, stranding me in the biting cold of early spring. I needed a reliable vehicle. I needed an auto loan. I slid 5 years of meticulously organized pay stubs across Julianne's desk. My hands shook. I needed her to see me as a capable adult, not a desperate kid. Julianne clicked her mouse. She was in her 40s, wearing a tailored blazer. Her eyes darted between my paperwork and her screen. She frowned, tapping a manicured fingernail against the keyboard. Mia, your debt-to-income ratio is irregular. You listed $800 a month for rent under fixed expenses. I nodded quickly. I wanted to show her how reliable I was. Yes, I pay it on the first of every month. I have a strict lease agreement with my father. I have never missed a payment. Julianne did not look impressed. She looked troubled. She typed something else into her system. The printer behind her whirred to life. "Ma'am," she said, keeping her voice low so the other cubicles wouldn't hear, "you don't pay rent." I let out a nervous laugh. "No, I do. I have the receipts. I can go home and get them." Julianne pulled a single sheet of paper from the printer tray and slid it across the desk. It was a county property record. "According to Boulder municipal tax records, you are the deeded owner of that address," she explained. "Your grandfather utilized a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act when you were 10. Your father is listed as the custodian, but the asset belongs to you. It transfers to your sole control today, on your 21st birthday." I stared at the paper, the black ink blurred. I saw my late grandfather's signature near the bottom. The property taxes are unusually low for this county. Julianne continued, pointing to a column of numbers. "It still carries an old agricultural zoning exemption your grandfather secured decades ago. The taxes are maybe $2,000 a year. Mia, where is your $800 a month going?" The air vanished from the cubicle. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed loud and persistent. My chest tightened. I tried to speak, to defend my father, to tell her she was wrong, but my vocal cords paralyzed. The realization hit my stomach like a cinder block. My father had not been teaching me responsibility. He had been taxing me to live in my own house. I didn't yell. I didn't deliver a clever comeback or demand a lawyer. I leaned forward, grabbed the small plastic trash can tucked under Julianne's desk, pulled it onto my lap, and threw up. To understand how I ended up being sick in a wastebasket at a credit union, you have to understand the day I stopped being a child. It is easy to look at a piece of paper at age 21 and know you were robbed. It is much harder to realize you spent 5 years actively thanking the person who robbed you. You have to look back to when I was 16 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. We lived in Boulder. That time of year along the Front Range is what locals call mud season. The winter snow melts into brown slush. The ski resorts close their runs, and the summer hiking tourists have not arrived yet. The local economy grinds to a halt. Restaurants cut shifts. Retail stores send their part-time workers home early. Money gets tight. I was bussing tables at a local lodge near the foothills, trying to save up for a used laptop. I got maybe 12 hours a week if I begged the manager to let me cover for older servers who called out sick. I came home from a shift smelling of stale French fries and sanitizer fluid. I found my father sitting at our scuffed oak kitchen table. Greg did not relax. He never lounged. He sat with his back straight, reading a printed document. My father grew up with nothing. He lost his childhood home to bank foreclosure in the 1980s when the regional economy collapsed. That experience did not make him compassionate. It made him pragmatic to a fault. He viewed affection as a liability and financial discipline as the only true measure of a person. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn a nod of approval from him. I wanted a single validation that I was not a burden. "Sit down, Mia," he said. I pulled out a chair. He slid a single sheet of paper across the wood. It was a standard residential lease agreement, the kind you buy in a tear-out pad from an office supply store. My name was typed at the top. His name was typed at the bottom. The blank space for the monthly rate was filled in with blue ink. $800. "Nothing in life is free," Mia Gregg stated. His voice carried no malice. It held a gritty, punishing pragmatism. He spoke to me the same way a loan officer speaks to a defaulting client. "You want to live here like an adult. You pay like one. Shelter costs money. Food costs money. It is time you learned the reality of the world before the world eats you alive." I stared at the paper. I looked at the specific room number listed on the lease. He was not renting me an upgraded basement suite. He was not offering me a private entrance or an independent living space. He was charging me $800 a month to sleep in the exact same room I had slept in since I was a toddler. The room that still had glow-in-the-dark plastic stars stuck to the ceiling. The room where my high school textbooks were currently sitting on a cheap desk. He was monetizing my childhood bedroom. My mind raced doing the math. Minimum wage for tipped workers was barely anything. $800 meant I needed to find a second job immediately. It meant giving up weekends. It meant I would never save enough for a car or college applications. Mud season was in full swing. My current paychecks barely cleared $300 a month. I would have to work every day after school and pull double shifts on Saturdays and Sundays just to hand my earnings right back to the man sitting across from me. I looked around the kitchen. My mother, Lydia, was nowhere to be seen. She often found reasons to run errands or fold laundry in another room when Greg made financial decisions. She hated conflict. She relied on his control to quell her own anxieties about poverty. I was on my own. I did not argue. I did not storm out or scream about how unfair it was. I looked at his face. His jaw was set. He was waiting for me to complain. He was waiting for me to act like a spoiled teenager so he could deliver a lecture about entitlement. I saw the way he looked at my older brother Lucas, who was always asking for bailouts. Lucas lived in Denver and constantly needed help with his rent or his startup ideas. I did not want to be Lucas. I wanted Greg to look at me with respect. I wanted to prove I was tough enough to handle his brutal version of the real world. My stomach cramped, my chest seized with a pathetic, desperate urge to prove I was worthy of occupying space in his house. I reached for the pen resting next to the paper. "I will have the first payment on Friday," I said. My voice sounded thin, but I forced it to remain steady. I signed my name on the bottom line. Greg took the paper back, folded it neatly, and placed it in his breast pocket. He gave me one single nod. That was my reward, a nod. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked down the hallway. I kept my posture straight until I reached the downstairs bathroom. I walked inside, closed the heavy wooden door, and locked it. I turned on the sink faucet to full blast so the sound of running water would mask any noise. Then my knees gave out. I sank onto the cold tile floor. The reality of what I had just agreed to crushed the air out of my lungs. I could not breathe. I leaned back against the bathtub, hyperventilating. Panic washed over me in hot, suffocating waves. $800 every single month for the rest of my high school career. I thought about the sheer volume of hours I would have to spend washing dishes and scrubbing floors just to be allowed to sleep in my own bed. A sob forced its way up my throat. I panicked. If Greg heard me crying, he would know I was weak. He would know I signed a contract I could not handle. I brought my right hand to my mouth and bit down hard on the fleshy part of my palm. The sharp physical pain grounded me. I bit down until the urge to scream passed, leaving red teeth marks embedded in my skin. The metallic taste of copper filled my mouth. I sat on the bath mat for 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart rate to slow down. I convinced myself this was normal. I told myself other kids had it worse. I rationalized his cruelty by framing it as a tough lesson in independence. If I worked hard enough, I would earn my place. If I paid the rent flawlessly, he would eventually respect me. I washed my face in the sink and walked back out into the hallway as if nothing had happened. I spent the next 5 years running myself into the ground. I handed over envelope after envelope of cash while my peers went to football games and studied for their entrance exams. I sacrificed my youth to meet that monthly deadline. I missed proms, I missed school trips. I took a job doing data entry at a ski rental outfitter to supplement my restaurant tips. The tragedy was not just the lost money. The tragedy was the exhaustion, the bone-deep fatigue that seeped into my joints and altered my entire personality. I became a machine built for working, and the people who lived in that house with me watched me break down piece by piece without ever intervening. I thought my father was the only one enforcing the rule. But soon I would learn that silence is just another form of collection. I thought I was surviving a harsh lesson. I had no idea I was walking into a trap set by the people who were supposed to protect me. The next few years became an uninterrupted loop of survival. My life lost its shape. There were no weekends or holidays. There were only shifts. I smelled constantly of industrial bleach from the bakery floor and stale coffee from the break room at the ski outfitter where I hauled boots and handled customer data entry until midnight. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. My bones ached with a deep, lingering exhaustion that settled into my joints and refused to leave. Winter on the Front Range changes people. When the snow hits, the roads turn treacherous. The morning commute on Interstate 25 is a punishing gauntlet of black ice and blinding glare. The local standard was a heavy all-wheel drive wagon with fresh snow tires. I drove a 10-year-old front-wheel drive sedan with a heater that barely worked and tires stripped down to the wire. I gripped the steering wheel with numb fingers, praying the brakes would hold, while massive utility vehicles sped past me. I was invisible to them. I was just an obstacle in their lane. If I slid into a ditch, I could not afford a tow truck. A tow truck meant missing the rent. Missing the rent meant facing my father. Every first of the month, I walked into the kitchen and placed an envelope on the counter. 8 $100 bills. Greg would pick it up. He did not say thank you. He wet his thumb and counted the bills right in front of me, checking for counterfeits or shortfalls. Then he nodded and pocketed the cash. I stood there swallowing the resentment that built up in my throat. I told myself I was playing a long game. I had a plan. I bought a cheap shoebox and hid it behind a loose drywall panel in the back of my closet. Every time a customer left a $5 tip on a table, or I managed to scrape together a few extra coins, I shoved it into that box. That box was my exit strategy. It was my ticket to Denver. I kept my head down. I did not complain. I calculated that if I endured this financial drain long enough, I could save just enough to vanish the day I turned 21. Then the illusion of my mother shattered. Lydia operated on the periphery of our household. She busied herself with laundry or gardening whenever Greg laid down his rules. I thought she was just helpless. I thought she was a victim of his rigid control just like I was. One morning in late January, the temperature dropped below zero. I reached into the deep pocket of my heavy puffer jacket, looking for my car keys. My fingers brushed against a small velvet box. I pulled it out and opened the hinged lid. It was not a bundle of hidden cash. It was a pair of cheap, tarnished gold hoop earrings. They were a minor family heirloom Lydia kept in her bedroom jewelry stand. Wrapped around the velvet cushion was a small piece of lined paper. The handwriting was rushed. For gas. I stared at the note. A cold realization washed over me, freezing the last drop of empathy I held for her. Lydia knew what Greg was doing to me was wrong. She knew the rent payments were starving me. She knew I was driving a death trap on bald tires to keep the peace. But instead of confronting her husband, she slipped me trinkets to pawn. She wanted me to walk into a seedy pawn shop downtown and trade her jewelry for $20 worth of unleaded fuel so she could sleep at night without feeling guilty. Her cowardice was profound. She preferred my humiliation over a single argument with Greg. She tracked the household bank accounts closely. She could have withdrawn $20 from an ATM. She chose to give me objects instead because objects did not leave a paper trail for Greg to find on a bank statement. She wanted to be a good mother in the shadows while letting my father drain my youth in the light. I did not confront her. I put the earrings in the glove compartment of my car and kept my mouth shut. I drove to the bakery. I drove to the outfitter. I kept handing over the monthly envelope. The distance between me and my parents grew into a vast, uncrossable canyon. The physical toll of this routine finally caught up with me during a brutal blizzard in mid-February. The sky was the color of bruised iron. The snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, piling up on the windshield faster than my broken wipers could clear it. I was driving home from a 14-hour double shift. My heater was blowing cold air. I could not feel my toes. The roads were mostly empty, abandoned by anyone with the sense to stay indoors. I stopped at a red light on a deserted intersection near the city limit. The rhythmic ticking of the turn signal matched my pulse. I closed my eyes just for a second to rest the stinging burn in my retinas. The heavy blanket of fatigue pulled me under. My foot slipped on the brake pedal. A blaring horn shattered the silence. I jerked awake, gasping for air. The car behind me was flashing its high beams. The light had turned green. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. My front tires spun fruitlessly on the ice before finally catching traction. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road and threw the car into park. I broke down. I did not cry with grace or quiet dignity. I burst into ugly, exhausted sobs. I hit the steering wheel with the heel of my palm over and over again until my knuckles bruised purple. I screamed into the empty, frozen cabin of my car. I was 19 years old, and I felt like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. I was trapped in a financial prison built by the people who were supposed to protect me. The wind howled against the thin glass of my windows. I sat there shivering, looking at the cheap plastic dashboard of a vehicle that was one pothole away from dying. I wiped the snot and tears from my face, using the rough sleeve of my winter coat. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced myself to put the car back into drive. I promised myself things would change as soon as my shoebox was full. I just needed to survive a little longer. I just needed to keep saving. I believed my hard work was building a quiet, undeniable resilience. I believed my father was treating me harshly because he simply did not have the means to be generous. But I had no idea that while I was rationing pennies for gas and pawning my mother's guilt offerings, my father was preparing to write a check that would turn my quiet resentment into burning fury. The stark reality of my family dynamic crystallized during my 19th winter. Up until that point, I had rationalized my father's cruelty as a universal standard. I thought Greg treated everyone with the same punishing financial detachment. I believed his rigid rules were simply how he engaged with the world. That illusion shattered the evening my older brother Lucas drove down from Denver in a state of sheer panic. Lucas is 5 years older than me. We grew up in the same house, but we might as well have been raised on different planets. Lucas was the golden son. He was a software developer who spent his time pitching startup ideas to angel investors. He lived in a sleek apartment in Denver and maintained a carefully curated lifestyle. I would see his social media posts featuring expensive dinners at upscale restaurants in Larimer Square, holding craft cocktails and talking about disruptive technology. He always wore a high-end down puffer vest. It was a classic regional fashion staple for tech entrepreneurs. He treated that vest like a uniform of success, wearing it everywhere, even indoors. He exuded an aura of effortless prosperity while I was scrubbing floors smelling of bleach. That Tuesday evening, the front door opened and Lucas marched into the kitchen. He did not bother taking off his boots. He kept his expensive puffer vest zipped up to his chin. His face was flushed, and he was pacing the hardwood floor, running his hands through his hair. I was standing by the sink, washing a pile of greasy baking sheets from my morning shift. My hands were cracked and bleeding from the hot water and harsh industrial soap. I watched him pace. Greg walked into the kitchen, holding a mug of black coffee. He stopped and looked at his son. "The application failed," Lucas blurted out. His voice was frantic. "The lead investor pulled out this morning. They froze the bridge loan. I owe my server hosting company thousands of dollars by Friday. If I do not pay them, they wipe the database. The whole project goes dark. Everything is gone." I kept scrubbing the baking sheet, but I paused my breathing. I expected Greg to deliver the same ruthless lecture he gave me every single month. I waited for the speech about how nothing in life is free. I waited for him to tell Lucas to get a second job bussing tables to pay off his debts. I waited for my father to demand accountability. Greg set his coffee mug on the counter. He walked over to the kitchen drawer where he kept his personal checkbook. He pulled it out and grabbed a pen. "How much do you need to keep the servers online?" Greg asked. His tone was not angry. It was steady. It was supportive. $5,000, Lucas stammered, looking down at his expensive boots. "I can structure it as a loan against future equity. I just need to survive this quarter." "Business is a risk, son," Greg murmured. He clicked the pen and began writing. He did not ask for a business plan. He did not demand a repayment schedule. He did not ask Lucas to sign a contract binding him to manual labor. "We look out for our own. You hit a roadblock, but you keep pushing forward." He ripped the check from the pad and handed it to my brother. $5,000, delivered in less than 3 minutes. My jaw locked. The greasy sponge slipped from my fingers and splashed into the murky sink water. I stared at the small piece of paper in Lucas's hand. $5,000 was more than 6 months of my rent. It was 6 months of hauling heavy rental skis. It was 6 months of waking up in the freezing dark to open a bakery. It was hundreds of hours of my youth traded for cash that Greg just casually handed away to save a failed application. My mind raced trying to make sense of the math. A dark, twisted logic formed in my head. I thought about the envelopes of cash I placed on that exact counter every first of the month. Greg always took them without a word. He never bought anything new for the house. He never upgraded his own vehicle. A bitter realization anchored itself in my chest. I assumed my grueling rent payments were directly subsidizing this doomed software company. I believed my father was funneling my minimum wage earnings into a secret account to fund my brother's entrepreneurial dreams. This was my red herring. I was so convinced by this narrative that it blinded me to the real theft happening right under my nose. I thought I was funding a business venture. I had no idea the truth of where my exact $800 was going was far more parasitic than a failed startup. I dried my cracked hands on a dish towel. I could not stay silent. The injustice burned the back of my throat. "Why does he get a check?" I asked. My voice broke the quiet camaraderie between the two men. Lucas looked up, surprised I was even in the room. Greg turned his head slowly. His expression hardened, instantly shifting from a supportive mentor back to a rigid warden. "What did you say?" Greg asked. I stepped away from the sink. I pointed at the piece of paper in my brother's hand. "I hand you $800 a month. I work 2 jobs. I drive a car with failing brakes. You tell me every single day that I have to earn my keep. But he walks in here asking for $5,000, and you just hand it to him. Why does he get a free pass?" Lucas shifted uncomfortably, zipping his puffer vest down an inch. "Come on, Mia. Do not do this right now. This is a corporate emergency." Greg stepped between me and my brother. He looked down at me with an expression of sheer pity mixed with disdain. It was the look you give a child who fails to understand basic arithmetic. "Your brother is building equity," Greg stated. Every word was clipped and deliberate. "He is taking calculated market risks to build a future. He is creating an asset. You are just paying for existing. You are paying for the food you eat and the space you take up. Do not ever compare your situation to his business." The words struck me like a physical blow. Paying for existing. That was my entire worth to him. I was a tenant occupying space while my brother was an investment worthy of saving. I did not deliver a brilliant counter-argument. I did not have a sharp cinematic response prepared. My throat restricted so tightly I could not draw a full breath. The betrayal was too heavy to carry in that brightly lit kitchen. I turned on my heel and fled. I pushed through the side door and stumbled into the garage. The air out there was freezing, holding the bitter chill of the Colorado winter. The garage was cluttered with old tools and heavy wooden workbenches. The smell of motor oil and sawdust filled my nose. I needed to release the pressure building inside my chest before it tore me apart. I saw an old ceramic coffee mug sitting on the edge of a workbench. It was stained with dried paint left behind from some forgotten home repair project. I grabbed the mug by the handle. I gripped it so tightly my knuckles turned white. All the exhaustion, all the skipped meals, all the terrifying drives on icy roads surged into my arm. I hurled the mug against the concrete foundation wall. It struck the cement with shattering force. The sharp crack echoed through the cold garage. Ceramic shards exploded outward, raining down across the dusty floor in a jagged arc. For a fraction of a second, the release felt good. Then the terror set in. I froze, staring at the door leading back into the kitchen. If Greg heard the noise, he would come out. He would see the broken mug. He would see that I lost my temper. He would look at me and see an unstable, hysterical teenager. He would use this outburst as proof that I lacked discipline. He would use it to justify treating me like a liability. Panic immediately replaced my rage. I dropped to my knees on the freezing concrete floor. I frantically began sweeping the broken ceramic pieces together using my bare hands. The sharp edges sliced into my already cracked skin, but I did not stop. I scraped my palms raw, gathering the debris into a small pile. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I swept the dust and the shards into my cupped hands, ignoring the stinging cuts. I dumped the broken pieces into a metal trash can, hiding the evidence of my breakdown beneath layers of oily shop rags. I sat back on my heels in the dim light of the garage, clutching my bleeding hands to my chest. I realized then that arguing with my father was a waste of energy. He would never see me as an equal. He would never view me as an investment. I was just a revenue stream. I made a vow to myself right there on the cold concrete. I would stop asking for fairness. I would stop trying to earn his elusive respect. I needed to escape. I needed to save every single penny hidden in my closet shoebox. I decided I would wait until my 21st birthday. I would take out an auto loan, buy a reliable car, and drive away from the Front Range forever. I thought I had a solid plan. I thought I knew exactly what I was running away from. I had no idea that walking into that credit union on my 21st birthday would not be my ticket out. It would be the day I discovered I was not running from a landlord. I was running from a thief. I drove away from the credit union with the printed county property record sitting on my passenger seat. The piece of paper felt radioactive. The heater in my dying sedan was blasting lukewarm air, but I was shivering uncontrollably. The drive back to the house took 20 minutes. During that time, my entire understanding of reality inverted. The man I thought was a harsh disciplinarian teaching me the value of hard work was actually a predator. He had watched me scrub industrial baking sheets with bleeding hands to pay rent on a house my grandfather had already given me. I parked in the driveway and stared at the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I did not have a plan. I just knew I had to get inside, pack my belongings, and figure out how to hire legal counsel. I took a deep breath, shoved the folded property deed deep into my coat pocket, and turned the doorknob. I walked into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks. Greg was standing by the center island. He was not reading the newspaper. He was not scowling at an electric bill. He was smiling. It was a wide, generous expression that completely transformed his face. It was terrifyingly rare. I had not seen him look that pleased since my high school graduation. Resting on the granite countertop were 2 glass bottles of a dark stout from a local microbrewery. Condensation dripped down the dark amber glass. Next to the bottles sat a thick stack of freshly printed paperwork with yellow sticky notes flagging the signature lines. "Happy 21st birthday, Mia," he said. His voice was jovial and warm. The sudden shift in his demeanor made my stomach churn. I stood frozen by the doorway, still wearing my heavy winter coat. He grabbed a bottle opener and popped the cap off one of the stouts. He slid the bottle across the counter toward me. "You are a real adult today," he continued, gesturing to the beer. "Around here, sharing a local brew on your 21st is a rite of passage. Come have a drink with your old man. We need to handle some quick business, and then we can celebrate." I forced my feet to move forward. The smell of roasted barley and hops hit my nose, causing a fresh wave of nausea. I looked down at the stack of papers. The front page had a bold heading that read, "Residential Lease Agreement and Financial Restructuring." "I drafted a new formalized lease for you, Greg," explained casually, taking a sip from his bottle. "You have proven you can handle the monthly payments. Now that you are of legal age, I want to report your rent to the credit bureaus. This new contract will help you build your credit score. It is the next step in your financial independence. Just sign by the yellow tabs, and we are good to go." He held out a black pen. Before today, I would have grabbed that pen with trembling gratitude. I would have thanked him for finally recognizing my maturity. I would have viewed this as a hard-earned promotion. But Julianne, the loan officer, had given me the cipher to read his true intentions. I did not pick up the pen. I looked closer at the documents. My eyes scanned past the bold heading down into the dense block of legal text in the middle of the second page. The legal jargon was heavy, but a few specific words jumped out at me. Relinquish, quitclaim, transfer of custodial assets, waiver of beneficial rights. This was not a lease agreement designed to build my credit. It was a legal trap. My grandfather had set up the property under a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. Under state law, the custodianship automatically terminated on my 21st birthday. Today, the house was legally vesting into my sole control at this exact moment. Greg knew this. He had drafted a quitclaim deed burying it inside a fake rental contract, hoping I would sign away my $500,000 asset in exchange for a pat on the back and a local beer. The walls of the kitchen suddenly felt like a closing vice. The air grew thin. My father stood inches away watching me read the paper. If I refused to sign, he would know something was wrong. If I accused him of theft right now, I was trapped in a house with a man who had spent 5 years systematically bleeding me dry. I had no leverage. I had no lawyer. I needed to get away from him. I let out a low groan and clutched my stomach. I swayed on my feet, knocking the glass bottle of stout so it clinked against the granite counter. "Dad, I feel awful," I stammered. My voice was shaky, which required no acting at all. "I threw up at the bank earlier. I think I caught that stomach bug going around the bakery." Greg frowned. The warm, jovial mask slipped, revealing a flash of deep irritation. The yellow sticky notes waited for my ink. "It will just take 10 seconds, Mia," he urged, tapping the pen against the counter. "Sign the paperwork, and then you can go rest." "I cannot look at a screen or read anything right now." I gasped, squeezing my eyes shut. "I am going to be sick again. I am so sorry. Let me just lie down for an hour. I will sign it as soon as the nausea passes." I did not wait for his permission. I clamped a hand over my mouth, turned my back on him, and bolted down the hallway. I scrambled up the carpeted stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I heard him call my name from the kitchen, but his tone was annoyed rather than suspicious. My bait had worked. I had bought myself a narrow window of time. I ran into my childhood bedroom and slammed the heavy wooden door behind me. My hands shook so violently I could barely turn the brass lock. A flimsy lock was not going to stop him if he realized I knew the truth. I needed a barricade. I turned toward the large oak dresser sitting against the far wall. It was a massive piece of furniture filled with old winter clothes and textbooks. I dug my boots into the carpet, gripped the edges of the solid wood, and pushed with all my body weight. The dresser groaned in protest, scraping loudly against the floorboards. Sweat broke out on my forehead. I shoved the heavy oak across the room until it wedged tightly beneath the doorknob, blocking the entrance completely. I backed away, panting hard. I was standing in the center of the bedroom I had occupied since I was a toddler. The plastic glow in the dark stars still clung to the ceiling. The faded posters still hung on the drywall. It was the room I had paid nearly $50,000 to inhabit. Now it was a barricade, a bunker inside my own property. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I needed to find a real estate attorney immediately. I needed to know how to stop a man who had custodial control over my life. I tapped the screen to open a web browser. A red icon flashed in the center of the glass. 5% battery remaining. My heart dropped into my stomach. I patted my coat pockets frantically. Empty. I checked the top of the oak dresser. Empty. I had left my phone charger plugged into the wall outlet in the downstairs kitchen, right next to the island where Greg was waiting with his fake lease. A fresh wave of panic hit me. I could not lose my only lifeline to the outside world. I crept toward the barricaded door and pressed my ear against the wood. I listened intently. I heard the faint sound of the television playing in the living room downstairs. Greg had moved away from the kitchen. I also heard the soft shuffle of footsteps moving along the upstairs hallway. "Mom," I whispered urgently, putting my mouth close to the crack between the door and the frame. The footsteps stopped. "Mom, are you there?" "Yes," Mia Lydia answered softly through the wood. Her voice was hesitant, carrying that familiar, timid edge. "Your father says you are sick. Do you need some water?" I swallowed hard, suppressing a surge of anger toward the woman who had watched me suffer for years. I needed her help. I could not afford pride right now. "Mom, my phone is dying," I whispered desperately. My charger is plugged into the wall next to the kitchen island. Please, can you go down and get it for me? I need it. I heard her shift her weight in the hallway. I can get it for you, she replied. Just open the door, sweetie. I cannot move the dresser. I lied, my voice cracking with genuine humiliation. I felt too weak. I crawled into bed. Please, just grab the cord and slide the thin end under the door gap. There is enough space. Please, Mom, do not tell Dad. Just help me. A long, agonizing silence stretched between us. I was reduced to a begging child negotiating for a simple cord through a locked door in a house I legally owned. The indignity of the moment burned my throat. I was an adult hiding from a man who wanted to steal my future, relying on a woman who had never protected me in the past. Okay, she finally whispered. I will be right back. I waited by the door, watching the narrow gap of light at the bottom. 5 minutes passed like hours. Finally, a shadow blocked the light. A white charging cable slithered under the wooden frame like a pale snake. I grabbed the metal tip and pulled the cord through, pulling it tightly into my hands. Thank you, I breathed out. I heard her walk away. I retreated to the far corner of my bedroom and plugged the adapter into the wall socket. The phone screen brightened, bringing a tiny measure of relief. I sat on the carpet, leaning my back against the cold drywall. I opened the search engine and began typing furiously, looking for legal representation in the foothills. I did not know the grueling forensic nightmare I was about to initiate. I just knew I was going to war. I waited in the dark until I heard the front door click shut. Greg always went for a morning run at dawn. He prided himself on his discipline. I shoved the heavy oak dresser aside just enough to slip through my bedroom door. I crept down the stairs, skipping the second step because I knew it creaked. I bypassed the kitchen entirely. I left the fake residential lease untouched on the granite island and walked out the back door into the freezing morning air. My rusted sedan struggled to start, but the engine finally caught. I drove out of the Boulder city limits, heading toward the foothills, where the landscape shifted from manicured suburban streets to rugged mountain terrain. I had found an attorney online during my frantic floorbound search the night before. His name was Marcus. His practice was located in a repurposed brick building that used to function as a mining supply outpost a century ago. The mortar between the bricks was crumbling in places, showing the heavy toll of mountain winters. The interior smelled intensely of old pine and decades of settled dust. Heavy exposed wooden beams crossed the ceiling. It was not a slick corporate suite with glass tables and espresso machines. It felt grounded and permanent. I walked into his office, gripping the printed county tax record inside my coat pocket like a weapon. I expected swift cinematic justice. I believed the paper I held was a magic wand that would solve everything by noon. Marcus was in his 50s with tired eyes and a pragmatic demeanor. He did not wear a suit jacket, just a wrinkled button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He looked like a man who spent his life untangling other people's disasters. I sat across his scarred wooden desk, pulled the folded deed from my pocket, and slapped it down onto the wood. I need you to call the police right now, I demanded. My father has been stealing from me for 5 years. He forced me to pay rent on a house I already own. He robbed me. I want him arrested for fraud today. Marcus did not reach for his desk phone. He did not match my breathless outrage. He calmly picked up the printout, adjusted his reading glasses, and scrutinized the text. He read every line carefully before setting the paper back down. He sighed, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. I hear your frustration, Mia. He began, his voice slow and deliberate. But we are not calling the police. This is not a criminal matter yet. It is a civil dispute. I stared at him, my jaw dropping. How is stealing nearly $50,000 from a teenager a civil dispute? He extorted me. He threatened to kick me out. Marcus tapped the document with a pen. Your grandfather set this property up under a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. We call it a UTMA account in estate law. Because you were a child when the transfer occurred, the state required an adult custodian to manage the asset until you turned 21. Your grandfather designated your father. That gave Greg broad legal authority. He had the legal right to manage the property, manage the funds related to the property, and make financial decisions on your behalf until yesterday. My chest tightened. But he charged me rent to sleep in my own childhood bedroom. He took the money from my 2 jobs. And a defense attorney will argue that maintaining a house costs money, Marcus countered smoothly. Property taxes exist, utility bills exist, food and maintenance exist. Under UTMAA, custodian is permitted to use funds for the benefit of the minor. Charging a working teenager room and board is ethically repulsive, but proving it constitutes legal fraud requires climbing a staggering mountain of evidence. I felt the blood rushing to my ears. A high-pitched ringing started in my head. I worked 2 jobs to hand him that cash. You are telling me the law says he was allowed to take it. I am telling you the law requires us to prove he did not spend it on you, Marcus corrected firmly. We have to execute a forensic accounting audit. We must subpoena his bank accounts and trace every single dollar you handed him over the last 5 years. We have to prove that your specific $800 a month did not go toward the water bill, or the roof repair, or the groceries in the refrigerator. We have to prove he enriched himself. If he can show a judge that your money contributed to household upkeep while you lived under his roof, his defense will claim he was acting reasonably within his custodial rights. The implication hung in the dusty, pine-scented air. Marcus was suggesting I might have legally benefited from my own extortion. He was telling me that my grueling labor might be legally interpreted as paying my fair share. The sheer injustice of his logic broke my restraint. I did not deliver a calm rebuttal. I did not hold my ground with quiet dignity. I lost my temper completely. "Are you taking his side?" I shouted, standing up so fast my chair tipped backward and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I washed dishes until my hands bled. I ate expired bakery food in the break room to save money while he sat in the living room watching television. You do not know anything about how I survived in that house. You do not know what he is. You are just another lawyer looking for excuses to protect a thief. Marcus did not flinch. He did not raise his voice to match mine. He just watched me with those tired, pragmatic eyes. I grabbed my coat and stormed out of his office. I slammed the heavy wooden door behind me, rattling the frosted glass. I marched out into the dirt parking lot. The freezing mountain air hit my flushed face. The morning wind whipped down from the foothills, biting through my thin jacket. I marched toward my car, muttering curses under my breath. I reached the driver's side door and grabbed the frozen metal handle. Then the adrenaline crashed. My knees turned to water. I leaned against the rusted side panel of my sedan, staring out at the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the mountains. The biting cold cleared the blind rage from my brain. The reality of my situation settled over me like a heavy lead blanket. Marcus was not defending my father. Marcus was explaining the battlefield. He was telling me the exact armor my father would wear into a courtroom. I had acted like a volatile child throwing a tantrum because the adult world did not offer a quick fix. I was entirely alone. If I alienated the only person willing to read the deed, I would lose everything. My father would win. I stood shivering by my broken car for 10 agonizing minutes, letting the shame settle deep into my bones. The cold numbed my fingers and toes. I took a shaky breath, turned around, and walked back into the brick building. I pushed his office door open slowly. My face was bright red. Tears of deep humiliation spilled over my cheeks. I picked up the fallen chair from the floor and sat back down weeping silently. "I am sorry," I choked out, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. "I am so sorry. I know you are trying to help me. I am just so tired. I cannot fight him by myself." Marcus reached across his desk and handed me a tissue box. He did not look smug or triumphant. He looked sympathetic. "I know you are tired, Mia," he said gently. "The civil legal system is agonizingly slow. It relies on paper and ledgers, not emotions. We are going to initiate the forensic audit. It will take months. We will track every penny. I promise you we will build a case. But we have to be smart, and we have to be patient." I nodded, blowing my nose and sitting up straighter. "Okay, we track the money. We do the audit." Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. His sympathetic expression vanished, replaced by a grim, hard urgency. "We will handle the rent money in due time," Marcus stated, "but we have an immediate crisis that cannot wait for a forensic audit. When you stormed out to the parking lot, I ran a preliminary title search on the property to verify the deed transfer status. Greg is not just hiding your rent money, Mia. He is making a move on the house right now." I stared at him, my tears stopping instantly. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. What do you mean? Marcus turned his computer monitor so I could see the screen. Greg applied for a massive loan against the house yesterday, he said, and he used your name to do it. To understand how I ended up being sick in a wastebasket at a credit union, you have to understand the day I stopped being a child. It is easy to look at a piece of paper at age 21 and know you were robbed. It is much harder to realize you spent 5 years actively thanking the person who robbed you. You have to look back to when I was 16 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. We lived in Boulder. That time of year along the Front Range is what locals call mud season. The winter snow melts into brown slush. The ski resorts close their runs, and the summer hiking tourists have not arrived yet. The local economy grinds to a halt. Restaurants cut shifts. Retail stores send their part-time workers home early. Money gets tight. I was bussing tables at a local lodge near the foothills, trying to save up for a used laptop. I got maybe 12 hours a week if I begged the manager to let me cover for older servers who called out sick. I came home from a shift smelling of stale French fries and sanitizer fluid. I found my father sitting at our scuffed oak kitchen table. Greg did not relax. He never lounged. He sat with his back straight, reading a printed document. My father grew up with nothing. He lost his childhood home to bank foreclosure in the 1980s when the regional economy collapsed. That experience did not make him compassionate. It made him pragmatic to a fault. He viewed affection as a liability and financial discipline as the only true measure of a person. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn a nod of approval from him. I wanted a single validation that I was not a burden. "Sit down, Mia," he said. I pulled out a chair. He slid a single sheet of paper across the wood. It was a standard residential lease agreement, the kind you buy in a tear-out pad from an office supply store. My name was typed at the top. His name was typed at the bottom. The blank space for the monthly rate was filled in with blue ink. $800. "Nothing in life is free," Mia Gregg stated. His voice carried no malice. It held a gritty, punishing pragmatism. He spoke to me the same way a loan officer speaks to a defaulting client. "You want to live here like an adult. You pay like one. Shelter costs money. Food costs money. It is time you learned the reality of the world before the world eats you alive." I stared at the paper. I looked at the specific room number listed on the lease. He was not renting me an upgraded basement suite. He was not offering me a private entrance or an independent living space. He was charging me $800 a month to sleep in the exact same room I had slept in since I was a toddler. The room that still had glow-in-the-dark plastic stars stuck to the ceiling. The room where my high school textbooks were currently sitting on a cheap desk. He was monetizing my childhood bedroom. My mind raced doing the math. Minimum wage for tipped workers was barely anything. $800 meant I needed to find a second job immediately. It meant giving up weekends. It meant I would never save enough for a car or college applications. Mud season was in full swing. My current paychecks barely cleared $300 a month. I would have to work every day after school and pull double shifts on Saturdays and Sundays just to hand my earnings right back to the man sitting across from me. I looked around the kitchen. My mother, Lydia, was nowhere to be seen. She often found reasons to run errands or fold laundry in another room when Greg made financial decisions. She hated conflict. She relied on his control to quell her own anxieties about poverty. I was on my own. I did not argue. I did not storm out or scream about how unfair it was. I looked at his face. His jaw was set. He was waiting for me to complain. He was waiting for me to act like a spoiled teenager so he could deliver a lecture about entitlement. I saw the way he looked at my older brother Lucas, who was always asking for bailouts. Lucas lived in Denver and constantly needed help with his rent or his startup ideas. I did not want to be Lucas. I wanted Greg to look at me with respect. I wanted to prove I was tough enough to handle his brutal version of the real world. My stomach cramped. My chest seized with a pathetic, desperate urge to prove I was worthy of occupying space in his house. I reached for the pen resting next to the paper. "I will have the first payment on Friday," I said. My voice sounded thin, but I forced it to remain steady. I signed my name on the bottom line. Greg took the paper back, folded it neatly, and placed it in his breast pocket. He gave me one single nod. That was my reward. A nod. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked down the hallway. I kept my posture straight until I reached the downstairs bathroom. I walked inside, closed the heavy wooden door, and locked it. I turned on the sink faucet to full blast so the sound of running water would mask any noise. Then my knees gave out. I sank onto the cold tile floor. The reality of what I had just agreed to crushed the air out of my lungs. I could not breathe. I leaned back against the bathtub, hyperventilating. Panic washed over me in hot, suffocating waves. $800 every single month for the rest of my high school career. I thought about the sheer volume of hours I would have to spend washing dishes and scrubbing floors just to be allowed to sleep in my own bed. A sob forced its way up my throat. I panicked. If Greg heard me crying, he would know I was weak. He would know I signed a contract I could not handle. I brought my right hand to my mouth and bit down hard on the fleshy part of my palm. The sharp physical pain grounded me. I bit down until the urge to scream passed, leaving red teeth marks embedded in my skin. The metallic taste of copper filled my mouth. I sat on the bath mat for 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart rate to slow down. I convinced myself this was normal. I told myself other kids had it worse. I rationalized his cruelty by framing it as a tough lesson in independence. If I worked hard enough, I would earn my place. If I paid the rent flawlessly, he would eventually respect me. I washed my face in the sink and walked back out into the hallway as if nothing had happened. I spent the next 5 years running myself into the ground. I handed over envelope after envelope of cash, while my peers went to football games and studied for their entrance exams. I sacrificed my youth to meet that monthly deadline. I missed proms. I missed school trips. I took a job doing data entry at a ski rental outfitter to supplement my restaurant tips. The tragedy was not just the lost money. The tragedy was the exhaustion, the bone-deep fatigue that seeped into my joints and altered my entire personality. I became a machine built for working, and the people who lived in that house with me watched me break down piece by piece without ever intervening. I thought my father was the only one enforcing the rule, but soon I would learn that silence is just another form of collection. I thought I was surviving a harsh lesson. I had no idea I was walking into a trap set by the people who were supposed to protect me. I left Marcus's office that first day in a state of suspended animation. He told me he needed to pull the full official records from the county to verify the scope of the loan application he had spotted in the preliminary search. He ordered me to go home, act normal, and wait for his call. Pretending everything was fine was the hardest acting job of my life. I worked my shifts at the bakery. I drove my failing sedan. I walked past my father in the kitchen and politely said good morning. Every time I looked at him, my skin crawled. He sat there sipping his coffee, looking like a strict but responsible parent, while I knew he was hoarding the cash I bled for. The case escalated from civil mismanagement to outright criminality 3 days later. I was wiping down tables at the lodge when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was Marcus. He did not bother with a greeting. He told me to clock out and get to his office right now. His voice lacked its usual tired pragmatism. It carried a grim, hard edge. I threw my apron on the break room counter and drove straight to the foothills. I walked into the repurposed brick building and found Marcus standing behind his desk. The surface was covered in printed financial documents. He did not offer me a seat. He picked up a thick stack of stapled papers and held them out to me. "Your father did not just mismanage your rent money," Marcus stated flatly. "He is actively trying to drain the entire value of your house." I took the papers. The logo at the top belonged to a regional cooperative bank. It was a well-known financial institution in the area that specialized in agricultural and mountain town equity loans. They were famous for cutting through red tape to help local ranchers and business owners get fast access to capital. "What is this?" I asked. My throat felt dry. "It is an application for a home equity line of credit," Marcus explained. "We call it a HELOC. Greg filed it 4 days ago. He applied to borrow $150,000 against the equity of the property. Because he chose a regional cooperative known for fast-tracking local approvals, the underwriting process is moving at terrifying speed." I stared at the black ink on the page. $150,000. The number was so large it did not feel real. It felt abstract. Why would the bank even let him do this? "I own the house now. I turned 21. The custodianship ended." Marcus nodded, pointing a pen at the bottom of the document. Exactly. The title automatically vests to you upon your 21st birthday. The bank required the signature of the legal adult owner to authorize releasing the funds. Your father knew he lost his custodial power this week. He knew he needed your permission, so he provided it. I flipped to the last page of the application. There, on the bottom line designated for the primary property owner, was a signature. It was my name written in cursive. The loops and slants matched my handwriting perfectly. It was a flawless forgery. The air in the office turned to ice. Ice filled my lungs and spilled into my veins. Greg was not just a greedy man taking my meager wages to teach me a twisted lesson about hard work. He was a predator, plotting to ruin my financial future. He wanted to extract 6 figures of untraceable cash from the house right as the deed transferred to me. He planned to take the money and leave me legally responsible for repaying a mountain of debt I never asked for. He was trying to bankrupt me before my adult life even began. My legs stopped working. My knees physically gave out beneath me. I could not support my own weight. I slid down the rough, exposed brick wall of Marcus's office. The coarse brick snagged the fabric of my coat, but I did not care. I hit the floor hard. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around my stomach. A sharp stabbing pain radiated through my gut. I gasped for air, feeling like I was suffocating in the dust and pine scent of the room. This was the man who raised me, the man who lectured me about ethics and accountability. He sat at the dinner table demanding honesty, while quietly practicing how to forge his own daughter's signature on banking documents. I dropped the papers onto the floorboards. I scrambled to my feet. A blinding, white-hot rage replaced the terror. "I am going to the house," I snarled. My voice shook with an intensity that scared me. "I am going to drive home right now and tear that place apart. I am going to throw his belongings onto the street. I am going to scream in his face until he admits what he did." I turned toward the door, reaching for the handle. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, anchoring me in place. "You will do no such thing," Marcus ordered. His tone was sharp, commanding me to focus. "Let go of me," I cried out, trying to pull away. He forged my signature. "He is stealing $150,000. I am going to confront him." "If you confront him right now, you lose," Marcus warned, staring directly at my face. "Listen to me, Mia. If you walk into that house and start screaming, Greg will know we are on to him. He will call the regional bank immediately. He will expedite the wire transfer claim, it is an emergency, and funnel that cash into an offshore account or a hidden shell company before the sun goes down. If that money leaves the cooperative bank, you will spend the next 10 years in federal court trying to prove you did not sign that paper. You will be fighting debt collectors while he hides the cash." I stopped pulling away. My chest heaved. I stared at Marcus, processing the brutal logic of his warning. "You cannot act on emotion right now." Marcus continued, releasing my arm, but keeping his stance, blocking the door. "This is a ticking clock. The bank is processing the final underwriting. We have maybe 48 hours before they release those funds to your father. We do not have time for a screaming match in a kitchen. We need a judge." "What do we do?" I whispered. My throat ached. "We file an emergency injunction," he replied, walking back around to his desk. "I am drafting a motion for a temporary restraining order on the property title. We will submit the forged application to a county judge along with your actual signature on your driver license to demonstrate the fraud. The judge will freeze the asset. The bank will be legally barred from dispersing a single cent of that equity line until a full hearing takes place." I looked down at the forged application still resting on the floorboards. The neat cursive loops mocked me. "Can we get the injunction today?" I asked. "I am filing it electronically within the hour," Marcus confirmed, typing rapidly on his keyboard. "A judge should review it by tomorrow morning. Once the court grants the freeze order, the bank will lock the account. Your father will not be able to withdraw anything. That is when you confront him. You wait until the trap is shut. Then you let him realize he is caught." I picked the papers up off the floor and set them on the desk. The sheer calculation required to survive my own family felt toxic. I had to go back to that house tonight and sleep under the same roof as a man trying to destroy my life. I had to sit across from him at the dinner table and eat the food my mother prepared while keeping this terrifying secret buried behind my teeth. I nodded slowly. "I will wait. Get the injunction. Freeze the house." Marcus stopped typing and looked up at me. "Go to your shift, Mia. Keep your head down. Tomorrow the legal freeze will hit his inbox. Then you can drop the hammer." I walked out of the brick building and into the biting mountain wind. I felt entirely different than the girl who had arrived an hour ago. The desperation was gone. The confusion was gone. I was no longer a confused teenager seeking approval from a harsh parent. I was an adult, preparing to execute a legal strike against a predator. I drove back toward Boulder, bracing myself for the dinner table. I knew the coming storm would shatter whatever remained of my family. I was ready to watch it break. The sky over Boulder turned the color of bruised iron by mid-afternoon. Colorado is famous for its deceptive spring weather. One day, you are wearing short sleeves in bright sunshine, and the next, a heavy, wet blizzard dumps 2 feet of snow across the Front Range. The temperature plummeted within hours. Thick, dense flakes began burying the streets, turning the familiar mountain roads into hazardous ice slicks. I drove my rusted sedan at a crawl, praying the bald tires would grip the accumulating slush. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, lighting up the dark interior of the car. I kept my eyes on the icy road, but glanced at the screen at the next red light. A text message from Marcus was waiting for me. The judge signed the emergency order. The bank locked the equity line. He cannot touch a single cent. The trap is shut. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. The legal freeze was active. Greg was locked out of the asset. The $150,000 he tried to extract using my forged signature was safe behind a judicial wall. Now I had to go home and face the man who tried to ruin me. The snow was falling so hard it formed a white curtain around the property, isolating us from the rest of the neighborhood. The local news had already issued travel warnings urging residents to stay off the roads. The storm was physically trapping us indoors. There was nowhere to run. I parked in the driveway and sat in the freezing car for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed county deed along with the copy of the forged loan application. I folded the documents and tucked them inside my heavy coat. I stepped out into the biting wind and walked up the front steps of my own house. The warmth of the hallway hit my face as soon as I opened the front door. The house smelled of roasted chicken and garlic. It was a picture of normal domestic tranquility. The stark contrast between the bitter storm outside and the cozy dinner inside made my stomach turn. I took off my snow-covered boots, leaving them dripping on the entry mat, but I did not take off my coat. I walked straight down the hall toward the dining room. Greg and Lydia were sitting at the polished oak dining table. Lydia was cutting a piece of meat, her posture hunched and quiet. Greg was checking an email on his smartphone while taking a sip of ice water. They were eating a hot meal in a house I owned, funded by a youth I surrendered to them. I stepped up to the edge of the table. I did not offer a polite greeting. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded documents. I tossed the papers directly onto the center of Greg's ceramic plate right over his food. The corners of the paper soaked up the dark gravy. "Explain this," I demanded. I stood there bracing myself for his reaction. I wanted him to go pale. I wanted him to stammer and beg for forgiveness. I wanted to see panic wash over his face as he realized his financial crimes were exposed. I expected my mother to gasp in horror and ask what he had done. I waited for the facade to crumble. None of that happened. Greg put his phone face down on the table. He picked up the grease-stained papers with steady fingers. He recognized the bank logo and the county tax header immediately. He did not drop the documents. He did not shout in surprise. He picked up his cloth napkin and calmly wiped his mouth, setting the napkin beside his plate. He looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "Your grandfather was a fool," Mia Gregg stated. His voice was chillingly steady, carrying the tone of a teacher correcting a slow student. "Handing a 10-year-old child a $500,000 asset is gross negligence. I charged you rent to teach you the value of $1. You needed to learn how the real world operates before it destroyed you." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer audacity of his logic. "You stole my wages," I pushed, trying to keep my jaw from trembling. "You made me work double shifts so you could pocket my cash. And this loan application," I pointed a shaking finger at the gravy-stained paper. "You forged my signature. You tried to saddle me with a 6-figure debt. I protected the equity from your inevitable mistakes," Greg replied, folding the papers and tossing them onto the center of the table. "You are a 21-year-old waitress. If you had access to that kind of capital, you would squander it on foolish decisions. I was securing the funds to ensure this family remained stable. I did what a father is supposed to do. I shielded the asset from your immaturity. He truly believed he was the hero of this story. He viewed my extortion as a vital parenting tactic. He viewed felony forgery as responsible financial stewardship. He felt no remorse because in his twisted worldview, my autonomy was a threat to the family's survival. The grief and the fury boiled over, blinding me to reason. I wanted my words to boom across the room like thunder. I wanted to sound intimidating and powerful, holding my hard-earned legal victory. "You stole from me," I yelled, but my vocal cords betrayed me. My voice cracked, splitting into a high, reedy squeak like a wounded animal. The sound humiliated me further. I did not look like a formidable opponent enforcing a boundary. I looked like a broken child throwing a tantrum. The realization that logic and evidence would never make him feel guilty shattered my remaining restraint. Words were useless. He would always twist them. I needed to cause a disruption so large it could not be ignored or rationalized. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the heavy linen table runner. I dug my fingers deep into the thick fabric, wrapping it around my fists. I threw my entire body weight backward, pulling the cloth with all my strength. The runner whipped across the polished oak surface. Plates lifted into the air. Wine glasses tipped over, spilling dark liquid across the wood. The bowls of hot roasted chicken and potatoes launched over the edge of the table. Ceramic shattered against the hardwood floor in a spectacular, ugly mess. Gravy splattered against the baseboards and soaked into the woven area rug. The noise echoed through the house, ringing in my ears. Lydia let out a piercing scream, pressing her hands over her face. She scrambled backward, her dining chair tipping over and crashing onto the floor behind her. Greg stood up slowly. He looked down at the ruined dinner covering his shoes. When he raised his head, the calm pragmatism vanished. His face darkened into a thunderous storm. The muscles in his jaw ticked. I stood amidst the broken porcelain and ruined food. My chest heaved up and down. My hands shook uncontrollably. I looked utterly deranged. The adrenaline spiked through my veins, mixing with a deep primal terror regarding the chaotic mess I had just created in my own dining room. The blizzard outside howled against the window panes, rattling the glass in its frames. The storm walled us inside. We were physically trapped in this house together. There was no escaping the confrontation now. The silence in the room stretched, pulling the tension tight. I waited for him to strike back, knowing the battle had only just begun. The shattered ceramic lay scattered across the hardwood floor. Dark gravy seeped into the woven fibers of the area rug. I stood in the center of the wreckage, panting hard, waiting for my father to explode. I expected him to shout. I expected him to lunge across the room and demand obedience. Greg did not yell. He did not raise his hands. He looked down at his ruined shoes and then slowly lifted his gaze to look at me. The thunderous anger in his expression dissolved into something far more dangerous. It was a cold, calculating, hollow look. He stepped over a broken dinner plate, the soles of his shoes crunching against porcelain fragments. He turned his back on me and walked out of the dining room, leaving my mother sobbing quietly on the floor. I froze in place. My chest heaved. I listened to his heavy footsteps move down the hallway toward his home office. The door opened and closed. A minute later, he returned. He was holding a brittle, yellowed file folder. The edges of the paper were frayed and stained with age. He walked back to the dining table and threw the folder down onto the one clean spot of exposed wood. "Look at it," Greg commanded. His voice was not a roar. It vibrated with a low, frantic energy I had never heard from him before. I hesitated. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of pulling the table runner. I stepped forward and peered down at the open folder. Inside was a stack of official documents printed with old typewriter ink. Faded red stamps marked the top corners of the pages. I recognized the formatting of legal notices. They were foreclosure papers, eviction notices, bank seizure records. The dates stamped on the documents were from the 1980s. "I grew up sleeping in the back of a freezing station wagon," Greg snarled, pointing a rigid finger at the yellowed papers. My voice caught in my throat as I listened to the raw, unresolved panic bleeding through his words. He told me about his childhood. He talked about the historical economic cycles of the regional mountain towns in Colorado. When the mining industry collapsed decades ago, the boom towns went bust overnight. The local economies were wiped out. His parents lost their jobs, their savings, and eventually their home. He described the bitter, biting cold of surviving a winter near Leadville without a roof over his head. He described the deep, burning shame of wearing unwashed clothes to a public school while the bank auctioned off his family belongings. "Your grandfather bypassed me when he wrote that deed." Greg continued, his tone shifting from panic to bitter resentment. "He thought I was too poor to handle wealth. He viewed my childhood poverty as a permanent stain. He thought I was a bad investment. Handing a $500,000 asset to a 10-year-old child was the ultimate insult. It was his way of telling me I was financially incompetent from beyond the grave." He placed his hands flat on the table, leaning toward me over the spilled food. "I did not steal from you, Mia. I took your rent to build a safety net. I hoarded that cash to make sure this family never ended up sleeping in a car on the side of a mountain road. I kept this family afloat. The forgery was just business. I was securing the equity to build a fortress around us." I stared at him. The sheer weight of his psychological baggage threatened to crush the room. He truly believed he was a savior. He had spent his entire adult life trying to outrun the ghost of a starving child. I took a deep, shaky breath. I needed to cut through his delusion. I needed to use logic. "Dad, the math does not make sense," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The property taxes on this house are roughly $2,000 a year because of the agricultural zoning exemption. I gave you $800 a month. That is nearly $10,000 a year. Over 5 years, I handed you almost $50,000 in cash." I stepped closer to the table, ignoring the broken glass near my boots. "If you were building a safety net, where is it? Where did the bulk of the cash actually go? Show me the savings account. Show me the fortress you claim you built with my wages." Greg ignored my questions. He bypassed the logic entirely and doubled down on the emotional trauma. He looked at me with raw, unfiltered vulnerability. His eyes were wide and desperate. For the first time in my entire life, I did not see a rigid, punishing patriarch. I saw a terrified little boy begging for validation. The psychological conditioning of my childhood kicked in with terrifying speed. For 5 years, I had been trained to manage his moods. I had been conditioned to sacrifice my own comfort to earn his approval. Standing there in the ruined dining room, a sickening wave of pity washed through my chest. The anger drained out of my limbs, leaving me weak and pliable. I looked at the eviction notices from his youth and felt an overwhelming urge to fix his broken past. For a terrible, suffocating minute, I faltered. The grip he had on my mind was that strong. I thought about Marcus sitting in his brick office filing the injunction. I thought about calling my lawyer and telling him to drop the lawsuit. I could just walk away. I could let Greg keep the $50,000. I could sign the house over to him and let him have his safety net. If it meant curing the haunted look in his eyes, maybe the sacrifice was worth it. I opened my mouth to concede. I raised my hands in a gesture of surrender, preparing to tell him I understood his pain. I was ready to apologize for ruining dinner and for fighting back. As I lifted my arms, I caught sight of my own hands under the bright dining room chandelier. I paused. I looked at my palms. The skin was cracked and calloused. Faint white scars tracked across my knuckles from harsh chemical burns I received scrubbing industrial equipment at the ski lodge. My fingernails were chipped and brittle. I thought about the dark bags under my eyes and the constant throbbing ache in my lower back. I thought about falling asleep at the wheel of a dangerous car in the middle of a blizzard because I could not afford to miss a single shift. I sacrificed my youth to heal his childhood. The realization hit me like a splash of freezing water. He was asking me to set myself on fire to keep him warm. He wanted me to subsidize his unresolved trauma using my own blood and sweat. My empathy curled into ash and blew away. Trauma was a tragic explanation for his behavior. It was not an excuse for theft. I lowered my hands. I stood up perfectly straight. The pity vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, rigid resolve. "Your past is a tragedy, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But you do not get to steal my future to pay for it. I am not your safety net. I am your daughter. And you robbed me." Greg saw the shift. He watched the submission fade from my posture. He realized the emotional manipulation had failed. The vulnerable little boy disappeared instantly, swallowed up by the ruthless pragmatist. His face hardened, turning to stone. The brief window of humanity slammed shut. If she will not play the role of the dutiful, submissive daughter, he will treat her like an enemy combatant. He reached down and picked up the yellowed file folder. He tucked it under his arm and looked at me with an expression of pure, icy disdain. "You think you are so smart with your legal injunctions and your bank records?" Greg stated calmly, stepping away from the ruined table. "You think a piece of paper makes you an adult? You are living under my roof eating my food. If you want to play a legal game, we will play by the rules." He walked over to the hallway coat rack and pulled a pre-printed document from the inner pocket of his jacket. He had prepared it before dinner, just in case the fake lease strategy fell apart. He walked back into the dining room and slapped the paper against my chest, forcing me to catch it before it fell. "Consider that your formal notice," he said, turning his back on me and walking toward the stairs. "You have 30 days to vacate my property." I looked down at the paper in my hands. It was a formal eviction notice. My own father was attempting to throw me out into a mountain blizzard to remove me from the very house I legally owned. The battle for my survival had just escalated from a financial dispute to a war over my physical shelter. I stood in the center of the ruined dining room, gripping the 30-day eviction notice. The sheer audacity of the document stole my breath. Greg was attempting to evict me from a property where my name sat alone on the deed. He was banking on the legal authority he held just 24 hours ago as my UTMA custodian. I did not scream. I did not engage in a shouting match. I walked out of the house into the freezing blizzard, got into my rusted sedan, and drove straight back to the foothills to find Marcus. Marcus acted swiftly. He bypassed standard civil filing procedures and submitted an emergency request for a temporary restraining order on the property. We were not just fighting over rent money anymore. We were fighting to prevent Greg from executing a fraudulent 6-figure loan and unlawfully displacing the legal owner. 2 days later, I found myself standing in a sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom at the Boulder County Courthouse. The air inside the building was dry and smelled of floor wax and old paper. Greg sat at the respondent table with a hired defense attorney, looking perfectly composed in a pressed suit. I sat next to Marcus, wearing the only clean blouse I could find. I expected swift cinematic justice. I believed the judge would look at the forged HELOC application, review the county tax records, and immediately order the sheriff to escort Greg off my property. I believed the evidence would grant me instant vindication. The legal system does not care about cinematic justice. The legal system cares about liability. The judge was a weary-looking man with deep lines around his mouth. He reviewed the emergency injunction file, adjusting his reading glasses. He noted the high volatility of the situation, the alleged forgery, and the conflicting claims of residency. "I am granting the temporary injunction to freeze the asset," the judge ruled, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "The title is locked. The bank is ordered to halt any processing on the equity line of credit. Neither party may borrow against, sell, or modify the property until a full evidentiary hearing is conducted." I exhaled a shaky breath of relief. The house was safe. The debt was stopped. However, the judge continued looking directly at me. "The level of domestic hostility described in these filings is deeply concerning. The court prioritizes physical safety above immediate property resolution. Until the forensic audit is complete and the full hearing takes place, it is the order of this court that the petitioner temporarily vacate the premises." My heart stopped. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the wooden table. "Your Honor." "I have the receipts," I blurted out, ignoring Marcus reaching for my arm. I pulled a stack of bank transfer printouts from my folder. "I pay $800 a month. I am the deeded owner. He is trying to evict me illegally. You cannot order me to leave my own house." "Miss," the judge warned sternly, "I am not litigating the financial fraud today. I am stabilizing a volatile domestic environment. Your father has established long-term residency. Forcing an immediate eviction of the current occupants without a full hearing poses an unacceptable risk of escalation. You will vacate the premises within 48 hours. You may return with a police escort to gather your personal belongings. The court is adjourned." The gavel fell. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I was devastated. I had won the injunction, but I had lost my home. The legal system delivered a harsh practical compromise that left me entirely untethered. Greg walked out of the courtroom with a slight triumphant smirk. He still had the house. I had nothing but a stack of papers and a mounting pile of legal fees. I ended up crashing on a sagging futon in my friend Chloe's apartment. The building was a notoriously cheap complex situated near the university campus, mostly populated by broke college students. It was poorly insulated and cramped. The mountain winds howled down from the peaks, rattling the single-pane windows violently in their frames. Every gust of freezing air seeped through the cracks, making the tiny living room feel like a walk-in freezer. I slept in my winter coat, huddled under a thin fleece blanket, listening to the sounds of undergraduate parties echoing through the thin walls. The physical discomfort was miserable, but the psychological isolation was agonizing. I was 21 years old, sleeping on a borrowed couch, legally barred from a $500,000 asset I owned. I still had to wake up at dawn to work my shifts at the bakery. I still hauled rental equipment at night. I had to maintain the grueling schedule just to survive while paying Marcus his hourly rate to conduct the forensic audit. The days blurred into an exhausting, punishing cycle. The legal limbo began to rot my sanity. I felt entirely abandoned. The people who were supposed to protect me had turned me into a refugee. One night, 3 weeks into my exile, the isolation finally broke me. Chloe was out working a night shift, leaving me alone in the freezing apartment. The wind was particularly brutal, rattling the glass panes so loudly I could not focus on the television. I walked to the corner gas station and bought a cheap bottle of red wine. I did not buy it to celebrate. I bought it to numb the constant buzzing anxiety in my head. I sat on the sagging futon, pulling the fleece blanket up to my chin, and drank the wine straight from the bottle. The cheap alcohol burned my throat, but it did its job. The sharp edges of my reality began to blur. The rational, pragmatic voice in my head that usually kept me grounded went quiet, replaced by a surging tide of pathetic, desperate grief. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I stared at my contact list. I scrolled past my mother. I scrolled past my father. My thumb hovered over my older brother's name. Lucas. Lucas was living in Denver in his trendy apartment. He was likely wearing his expensive down puffer vest, dining at a high-end restaurant, completely insulated from the war tearing our family apart. Greg had bailed him out of his startup failure months ago. He was safe. He was comfortable. He had watched me scrub baseboards and drive a broken car for 5 years. He had watched our father extract cash from me every first of the month. I tapped the green call button. The phone rang 3 times before kicking over to voicemail. "Hey, it is Lucas," his recorded voice chirped brightly. "I am probably pitching the next big thing or grabbing a craft brew. Leave a message and I will hit you back." The sheer oblivious privilege of his voicemail greeting sent a spike of raw emotional pain straight through my chest. The beep sounded. I intended to leave a calm, rational message asking him to intervene. I intended to ask him to talk sense into our father. That is not what happened. "Lucas." I slurred the cheap wine, thickening my tongue. "Where are you? Why are you ignoring this?" A hot tear spilled over my eyelid, tracking down my cheek. The dam broke. All the exhaustion, all the fear, all the profound humiliation of sleeping on a borrowed couch poured into the receiver. "I worked 2 jobs. "Lucas?" I screamed into the phone, my voice breaking into a ragged sob. "I worked 2 jobs since I was 16 years old. You watched him take my money. You sat at the dinner table and you watched him treat me like a tenant. I am sleeping on a freezing futon right now. I do not have a home. Why did you not protect me? You are my older brother. You are supposed to protect me." I choked on a sob, burying my face in the fleece blanket. "He forged my signature, Lucas. He tried to ruin my life. And you are just sitting in Denver acting like nothing is happening. Why does he love you more than me? Why do you get to be safe? Call me back. Please, just call me back." I ended the recording and dropped the phone onto the floor. I curled into a tight ball on the futon, crying until my chest ached and my eyes swelled shut. I cried until the alcohol pulled me under into a dark, dreamless sleep. I woke up the next morning to the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. A blinding headache pulsed behind my temples. My mouth tasted like stale, sour grapes. I rolled over and saw my phone lying on the carpet. The memories of the previous night crashed into my brain. A profound, crushing embarrassment washed over me. The lack of dignity was suffocating. I had begged for validation from a man who had spent his entire life happily ignoring my struggles. I had handed my brother undeniable proof of how deeply broken I was. I scrambled for my phone, praying the call had not gone through. I checked my outgoing call log. A 3-minute and 12-second voicemail had been delivered to his inbox at 2 a.m. I felt physically sick. I waited all morning for a text or a call back. I waited for an apology or an explanation. I waited for Lucas to show a single shred of fraternal loyalty. He never called back. The silence from Denver was absolute. His refusal to acknowledge my breakdown was the final nail in the coffin of my family. I realized then that I could not appeal to their conscience because they simply did not possess one when it came to me. I dragged myself off the futon, took a cold shower, and drove to Marcus's office. I was done crying. I was done begging for family loyalty. I needed the results of the forensic audit. I needed the math to deliver the justice the legal system was delaying. I had no idea that the financial ledger waiting on Marcus's desk would reveal a betrayal so depraved it would make my midnight voicemail look like a minor misunderstanding. The forensic audit took 4 agonizing months. It was a punishing wait. 120 days of sleeping on a sagging futon near the university, fighting drafty windows, and a constant biting cold. 120 days of waking up before dawn to work shifts at the bakery and the ski outfitter hauling gear while pretending my life was normal. The temporary injunction kept my house safe from the bank, but it kept me locked out of my own property. I lived in an agonizing state of suspended animation. I rationalized the wait by clinging to a foolish, desperate sliver of hope. I allowed myself to imagine that when Marcus finally received the subpoenaed bank records, they would reveal a secret savings account bearing my name. I thought maybe beneath his cruel exterior, my father was telling the truth. Maybe he really was protecting the asset hoarding my rent money in a high-yield account to hand back to me when I proved I was responsible. It was a pathetic delusion born out of a deep primal need to believe my parents were not monsters. Then Marcus called. The snow had finally melted, giving way to the bright, intense sunshine of a Colorado summer. The heat radiating off the asphalt was sharp. I drove to the foothills and walked into the repurposed brick building. The smell of old pine and dust greeted me. Marcus was sitting behind his desk. He did not look triumphant. He looked profoundly weary. He slid a thick black binder across the scarred wooden surface. "The audit is complete," Mia Marcus stated. His voice was clinical, devoid of any softening cushion. "We traced the money. Every single transfer from your 16th birthday until the day the injunction froze the accounts." I sat down in the leather chair. The leather creaked loudly in the quiet room. I stared at the binder. My heart thudded against my ribs. I reached out and opened the cover. Inside was a master ledger breaking down 5 years of financial activity. Column A detailed the exact dates I had deposited my envelope of $800 into Greg's custodial checking account. The dates marched down the page like a metronome of my stolen youth. The 1st of May, the 1st of June, the 1st of July. $48,000 in total. I dragged my finger across the page to column B. This column tracked outgoing disbursements from the custodial account. I scanned the lines looking for the corresponding dates, looking for the transfer to a locked savings account or a Vanguard mutual fund. I did not find a savings account. Instead, I found a repetitive automated withdrawal. 3 days after every single deposit, I made an identical outgoing transfer of $800 was executed. The money moved with mechanical precision. In on the first, out on the fourth. I traced the outgoing line to the recipient institution listed in column C. It was not a high-yield savings fund. It was an automotive leasing company. I stopped breathing. The air in the office suddenly felt thick and unbreathable. I looked closer at the recipient details. The company specialized in high-end luxury vehicles. The address attached to the lease account was located in Lodo, lower downtown Denver. Lodo is a notoriously expensive historic district characterized by renovated brick lofts, high-end breweries, and aggressive tech wealth. It was the exact neighborhood where my older brother Lucas rented his apartment. I looked up at Marcus. My brain struggled to process the math. My throat felt like it was coated in sand. "What is this?" I rasped. "Why is my money going to a car lease in Lodo?" Marcus removed his reading glasses and set them carefully on his desk. He looked at me with an expression of deep, unsettling pity. "Greg did not build a safety net," Mia Marcus explained gently. "The audit shows no evidence of long-term savings or emergency hoarding. He used his custodial authority to co-sign a luxury auto lease for Lucas. The monthly payment on that specific vehicle is exactly $800. Your father synchronized the payments. Your monthly rent covered your brother's Audi down to the exact penny." The words hit my chest with the force of a physical blow. The luxury Audi. I had seen it. I had watched Lucas drive it up to Boulder, pulling into our driveway with the sleek, polished frame gleaming in the sun. I had watched him step out wearing his expensive down puffer vest, complaining about the cost of premium gasoline. I thought he was leasing it with his startup capital. I thought he was a successful entrepreneur projecting an image of tech wealth. He was not successful. He was a parasite. My father had not stolen my wages to protect the family from poverty. He had stolen my wages to subsidize his golden son. I scrubbed industrial baking sheets with cracked, bleeding hands so Lucas could drive a European luxury car to craft breweries. I fell asleep at the wheel of a rusted sedan with failing brakes in the middle of a blizzard so Lucas could enjoy heated leather seats. I lived in terror of missing a payment while my brother literally drove on my labor. The sheer audacity, the profound depravity of the arrangement paralyzed my vocal cords. I could not speak. I could not form a coherent sentence. The betrayal was too vast to articulate. It was not just a financial crime. It was a complete erasure of my humanity. To my father, I was not a daughter. I was a revenue stream designed to fund the child he actually valued. I stared down at the printed ledger. Lucas's name was typed next to the lease agreement details. The black ink mocked me. It mocked every skipped meal, every canceled social event, every tear I shed in the downstairs bathroom trying to earn my father's respect. A cold, hard sensation spread through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. The panic and the hurt evaporated, replaced by a terrifying clinical focus. I reached across the desk and picked up a red grading pen sitting near Marcus's keyboard. I did not ask for permission. I gripped the plastic barrel so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. I brought the tip of the pen down onto the printed ledger directly over Lucas's typed name. I began to scratch it out. I dragged the red ink back and forth across the letters. I pressed the pen down with escalating force. The red ink bled heavily into the paper, obscuring the text. I kept scratching, dragging the pen back and forth in a frantic, aggressive rhythm. The tip of the pen caught the fragile surface of the legal document. I pushed harder. The paper ripped. I kept scratching over the torn edges, driving the red ink into the jagged hole until the pen scored the wood of Marcus's desk underneath. My hands shook violently. My breathing was ragged and shallow. I was destroying the page, unable to articulate the depth of the hatred blooming in my chest. Marcus did not try to stop me. He sat quietly in his leather chair, letting me tear the document to pieces. He understood that logic had failed. This was an exorcism. I finally stopped. My chest heaved. I dropped the ruined red pen onto the desk. It rolled off the edge and clattered onto the floorboards. I stared at the mutilated paper. "Can we prove this in court?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "Can we prove the exact correlation between my deposits and his lease?" Marcus nodded, picking up a secondary file from his desk. "The math is undeniable. The timestamps match perfectly for 5 consecutive years. It is a clear, unambiguous breach of fiduciary duty. Under UTMA regulations, a custodian cannot use the minor's assets to enrich a third-party family member. This ledger destroys any defense he has regarding household upkeep or fair market rent." "Good," I stated coldly. I stood up from the chair. The shivering was gone. The pathetic need for parental approval was dead. "When do we depose him?" I demanded. "I want him on the record. I want to watch him try to explain this under oath." "We scheduled the deposition for next week," Marcus replied, standing up and gathering the remaining files. "It will take place at opposing counsel's office in the Denver Tech Center. I need you to be prepared, Mia. The math is on our side, but defense attorneys do not fight math. They fight character. They are going to try to paint you as an ungrateful dependent. They will try to rattle you. You have to remain calm. I looked at the torn, red-stained ledger one last time. I was not worried about remaining calm. The girl who threw up in a bank trash can was gone. The girl who threw a ceramic mug in a garage was gone. I was walking into that deposition with the unshakable clarity of a woman who had just realized she had absolutely nothing left to lose. My father thought he was untouchable because he held the authority of a parent. He was about to find out that authority is worthless when the receipts are laid bare. The Denver Tech Center is a sprawling maze of mirrored glass high-rises and manicured corporate plazas located south of the city. It is an environment built exclusively for executives and venture capitalists. The glass facades reflect the harsh mountain sun, creating a landscape of cold, sterile wealth. Walking into the lobby of the defense firm, I felt like a trespasser. My slacks were from a discount rack, and my shoes were deeply scuffed from months of restaurant shifts. The air in the building smelled of expensive cologne and polished leather. It was a jarring contrast to the scent of stale coffee and industrial cleaner I carried in my memory. We sat in a large conference room on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains, but the room itself felt like an interrogation cell. Greg sat across the long mahogany table. He wore a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the responsible stoic patriarch. He projected an aura of unshakable calm. Next to him sat his defense attorney, a man named Barrett. Barrett wore a silk tie and exuded a slick, condescending confidence. I sat next to Marcus, gripping my hands in my lap to hide my trembling fingers. The court reporter swore me in. Barrett did not waste time with pleasantries. He launched straight into the financial arrangements of my adolescence. He did not bother denying that my father took $48,000 from me. The bank ledgers were undeniable. He simply reframed the narrative. He painted a picture of a generous father dealing with an ungrateful, burdensome dependent. He spoke to me as if I were a rebellious teenager who needed a firm hand. Miss Barrett began, his tone dripping with patronizing patience. "Did you reside in your father's home from age 16 to 21? "Yes, I did," I answered softly. "Did you utilize the heating system during the bitter winter months? Did you turn on the lights? Did you consume the hot water for your showers?" I swallowed hard and said yes. Barrett smiled a thin, cruel line. "And would you agree that $800 a month is a fraction of the fair market value for room and board in Boulder County?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany. "Your father was not stealing from you. He was recouping a modest contribution for your own upbringing. He was keeping a roof over your head." I felt cornered. The narrative he was spinning made logical sense to anyone who did not know the truth. He was erasing the grueling double shifts, the frozen commutes, the sheer exhaustion of my teenage years. He was reducing my survival to a utility bill calculation. Panic clawed at my throat. I needed to prove I was not a freeloader. I needed the court reporter to type down the reality of my isolated existence. I leaned forward and took the bait. "I paid for my own things," I stammered, my voice rising in pitch. "I bought my own food. I bought generic brand cereal every Tuesday. I purchased my own toothpaste. I bought shampoo and laundry detergent and my own winter coats from thrift stores. I paid for my own gas. I paid for the oil changes on my car. I even paid for the heating pad I used when I pulled a muscle-hauling rental boots." I rattled off the items in a frantic, breathless rush. The list sounded pathetic. It sounded juvenile. I was trying to justify my humanity with grocery receipts. Barrett raised an eyebrow, looking at Marcus with a smirk of pure pity. The humiliation boiled over. I was a legal adult, sitting in a corporate high-rise, defending my right to keep my own wages by listing the cost of cheap toothpaste. "You do not know anything," I yelled. Hot tears spilled over my cheeks, tracking down my face. I slammed my hands flat against the mahogany table. "You do not know how I lived. You do not know what it felt like to freeze in that house while he took everything I had." I was weeping openly, unable to control the ragged gasps escaping my chest. The carefully maintained facade of a composed adult shattered. "Stop talking," Marcus ordered. His voice cut through my panic like ice water. It was sharp cold and devoid of any comforting warmth. He did not pat my shoulder. He did not offer me a tissue. He treated me like a client who was actively jeopardizing a case. "We do not litigate feelings in this room, Mia," he stated firmly. "We litigate facts. Close your mouth and let me do my job." I snapped my mouth shut, biting my lower lip to stifle a sob. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, sinking low into my leather chair. The defeat tasted like ash in my mouth. I felt entirely broken. Marcus turned his attention away from me and focused on the defense attorney. He did not match Barrett's slick condescension. He operated with clinical, surgical precision. He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve. He slid the document across the long table until it stopped directly in front of my father. "You are arguing that the $800 was a reasonable contribution for a dependent child living in a parental household," Marcus stated flatly. "The law provides broad protections for UTMA custodians who use minor funds for the benefit of the minor. That is a well-known legal precedent. However, Mr. Barrett, your client, did not classify his daughter as a dependent contributing to a household. He classified her as a tenant." Barrett frowned, picking up the document. Greg stared at the paper. It was the original residential lease agreement. The exact same piece of paper Greg had pushed across the scuffed kitchen table 5 years ago. My name was typed at the top. His name was typed at the bottom. The blank space for the monthly rate was filled in with blue ink. $800. By forcing a minor to sign a formalized commercial residential lease, your client legally altered the nature of the relationship, Marcus explained. His tone was methodical, dissecting the defense argument piece by piece. He established a landlord and tenant dynamic. Under state laws governing Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, accounts a custodian charging a beneficiary commercial rent to reside on the beneficiary's own deeded property is a definitive breach of fiduciary duty. It is the literal definition of self-dealing. The smug confidence drained from Barrett's face. He set the paper down and looked at his client. Greg went stark white. The color washed out of his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly gray. He stared at the blue ink on the bottom line. He had drafted that document to assert his dominance. He had used it to trap a 16-year-old girl in a financial prison under the guise of teaching her a harsh life lesson. Now that identical piece of paper was the indisputable proof of his fraud. He could not claim he was pooling resources for the family. He could not claim the money was a casual contribution for groceries or utilities. The lease explicitly defined the transaction as commercial revenue. A custodian cannot form a commercial contract to rent a house to the person who actually owns the house. The weapon he had forged to control my entire adolescence had just detonated in his hands, obliterating his legal defense. The math was no longer ambiguous. The narrative of the strict but loving father was dead. It was documented extortion. Marcus did not gloat. He simply folded his hands on the table and waited. The deposition concluded shortly after that reveal. Barrett requested an immediate recess to confer with his client. We walked out of the glass-walled room, leaving my father sitting in silence, staring at the lease agreement. The drive down the elevator to the lobby was quiet. I wiped the remaining tear streaks from my face. I had survived the interrogation. The facts had won the day. But as we stepped out into the bright Denver sunlight, I knew a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. Greg's legal shield was gone. He could no longer hide behind the facade of a strict parent protecting his child. He was exposed to the harsh light of the judicial system. An exposed predator would not simply surrender and hand over the keys. The battle in the boardroom was finished, but the desperate, unhinged scramble to save his reputation was just beginning. My father had relied on my silence for years, and now that I was speaking through a lawyer, he would have to find a new way to shut me down. The week following the deposition felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. I was still crashing on the sagging futon in Chloe's drafty apartment. The temporary injunction kept me locked out of my house. I was working double shifts trying to cover the mounting legal fees Marcus required to prepare for the final probate hearing. My body was giving out, but the adrenaline of the looming court date kept me moving. I finished a grueling 10-hour shift hauling rental gear at the ski outfitter. The sun had long since set over the foothills. The air in the employee parking lot was bitterly cold, cutting through my thin winter jacket. I zipped my coat up to my chin and trudged across the frozen asphalt toward my rusted sedan. My muscles ached. I just wanted to collapse onto the futon and sleep for a few hours before the bakery shift began. I stopped abruptly. A familiar figure was standing next to my car. It was my mother. Lydia looked frail, wrapped tightly in a heavy wool coat. Her breath plumed in the freezing night air. She stood near the driver's side door, her hands jammed deep into her pockets. Around us, the parking lot buzzed with oblivious activity. Tourists clomped past in heavy plastic ski boots carrying snowboards and laughing loudly. They were entirely disconnected from the quiet, desperate standoff happening a few feet away. "Mom," I said, my voice raspy from a long day of talking over loud equipment. "What are you doing here?" Lydia jumped, slightly startled by my voice. She turned toward me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and darted nervously around the lot, as if expecting Greg to step out from behind a snowbank. She looked terrified. "Mia," she whispered, stepping closer. "I have been waiting for an hour. I did not want to call your phone. I thought you might have blocked my number." "I have not blocked you," I replied softly. I kept my distance. My chest tightened. A painful ache bloomed in my ribs. I had missed her. Despite the cowardice, despite the years of silent complicity, I still wanted my mother. I wanted her to wrap her arms around me and tell me she was going to make it right. Lydia reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small rectangular piece of plastic and held it out to me. Her hand trembled violently in the cold. It was a platinum credit card. "Take it," she urged, pushing it toward my chest. "It is a secret account I opened years ago. Greg does not monitor it. It is maxed out for cash advances. There is a $10,000 limit available if you pull it from an ATM." I stared at the plastic card. I did not reach for it. $10,000 of high-interest debt acquired in secret. It was a staggering amount of money for a woman who never handled the household finances. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. It is all I could pull without him noticing Lydia choked out tears welling in her eyes. "It is for you, to help you find an apartment, to get you back on your feet." "I am so sorry, Mia. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. Please just take the card, take the money, and drop the lawsuit." The ache in my chest curled into a tight, hard knot of betrayal. She was not here to rescue me. She was here to bribe me. She was offering me a fraction of what was stolen, funded by toxic debt, to buy my silence. She wanted me to accept a $10,000 cash advance drop, a civil fraud case regarding a $500,000 asset, and walk away from my own property so she could go back to pretending her husband was a good man. I looked at the tears streaming down her face. She was drowning in the guilt of her enabling behavior, but she was still unwilling to break the cycle. She preferred paying a ransom over standing up to the tyrant. I slipped my right hand into my coat pocket. My fingers found my smartphone. I felt for the side button, activating the screen blindly. I swiped up, accessing the quick menu, and tapped the icon for the voice memo app. I hit the record button. I kept the phone hidden deep inside the pocket, aiming the microphone toward her. "Mom, I do not want this credit card," I pleaded, letting my voice crack with genuine exhaustion. "I do not want a cash advance. I want my house. I want the money he stole from me to pay for Lucas's luxury car." Lydia flinched at the mention of the car lease. She knew the entire time. "Please, Mia," she begged, stepping closer and trying to press the card into my hand. "Do not do this to him. The deposition destroyed him. If you take this to a judge, he will lose everything. He will be bankrupt. We will lose the house. We will be out on the street." "It is my house," I corrected her firmly, stepping back. "He tried to drain the equity. He forged my signature on the loan application, Mom. You know he did it. Just help me prove it." I squeezed the phone in my pocket. I needed her to say it out loud. If I could capture Lydia admitting to the forgery on tape, the civil case would be bulletproof. Greg's remaining defense would shatter completely. I was manipulating a broken woman to secure my own survival. The sheer toxicity of the interaction made me sick to my stomach, but I pushed forward anyway. "Mom, just sign an affidavit," I urged, my voice rising over the crunching boots of passing skiers. "Tell the court he forged the HELOC document. Tell them he used my rent to pay for Lucas's car. If you tell the truth, the judge will force him to settle immediately. We can end this nightmare today. Help me!" Lydia recoiled violently, as if I had struck her across the face. She shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with sheer panic. "I cannot," she gasped, backing away. "I will not testify against your father. I am not signing anything for a lawyer. I am not getting involved in a courtroom. You are trying to destroy this family. Just take the card and leave us alone." She shoved the platinum credit card forward. I raised my hand to block it. In the clumsy, frantic exchange, my coat pocket snagged on. The morning after my mother fled the parking lot, Marcus called me with an update. The legal machinery we had set in motion was finally grinding my father down. Barrett, the slick defense attorney from the Denver Tech Center, had submitted a formal settlement offer. Marcus emailed me the PDF and told me to review it carefully before making a decision. I printed the contract at a local copy shop and walked to a busy independent coffee shop on Pearl Street. Pearl Street is the vibrant pedestrian heart of Boulder. It is usually filled with street performers, tourists, and packs of carefree university students. I sat at a small corner table nursing a black coffee and watched them through the large storefront window. I watched groups of young people laughing, passing around smartphones, and wearing expensive outdoor gear. They looked so incredibly light. They carried backpacks filled with textbooks, not legal files detailing their own family's fraud. They were living the youth I was forced to subsidize for someone else. I looked down at the settlement offer resting on the table. The terms were straightforward. Greg offered to immediately vacate the property. He would sign over the unencumbered deed, transferring full legal control of the house to me today without a protracted trial. The catch was buried in the second paragraph. In exchange for the house, I had to sign a comprehensive liability waiver. The waiver explicitly released Greg from any obligation to repay the $48,000 he had stolen. It also contained a non-disclosure clause preventing me from filing a police report regarding the forged HELOC application. It was a classic legal maneuver. He was returning the asset he already legally lost to avoid criminal charges and financial ruin. Marcus had explained the reality of a trial. If we rejected the settlement, we would go before a probate judge. The judge would almost certainly order the return of the funds. But securing a judgment and actually collecting the cash are two very different things. If Greg filed for bankruptcy, it could take years to see a dime. The legal fees to fight that battle would consume thousands more. I was so profoundly tired. The exhaustion was no longer just physical. It was a deep spiritual rot. I was sleeping on a sagging futon. I was estranged from my entire family. I was fighting a war of attrition, and my reserves were empty. I looked at the signature line on the settlement offer. If I signed my name, I could go home. I could sleep in my own bed. I could lock the front door and never look at my father again. The $48,000 was gone. I knew that. Letting it go felt like cutting off a crushed limb to escape a trap. I pulled a black pen from my bag and uncapped it. I physically placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. I was ready to surrender. I just wanted peace. I pulled out my phone with a shattered screen and dialed Greg's number. I did not want to negotiate. I just wanted to tell him it was over. The phone rang twice. "Hello," Greg answered. His voice was steady, giving away nothing. "Dad? It is Mia," I said. My voice sounded hollow, empty of the rage that had fueled me for months. "I am looking at the settlement offer from Barrett." There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He was waiting to see if his bluff had worked. "I am going to sign it," I told him, staring blankly at the bustling street outside the window. "I am dropping the lawsuit. You can keep the rent money. Just get out of the house by Friday and leave the keys on the counter." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a man who just realized he dodged a bullet. He was terrified. He knew the forged HELOC application was a felony. He knew the forensic audit regarding Lucas's car lease destroyed his fiduciary defense. He had been staring down the barrel of total ruin, and I had just handed him a pardon. A normal parent, a human being with a shred of decency, would have said thank you. They would have expressed relief. They would have taken the extraordinary grace I was offering and retreated quietly. Greg did not do that. Greg could not allow me to hold the power in the dynamic. He had to reassert his dominance. He had to prove he was still the patriarch dictating the terms of my life. "I knew you would finally be reasonable," Greg said. His tone was dripping with patronizing smugness. It was the exact same voice he used when he pushed the lease agreement across the table 5 years ago. I am glad you finally came to your senses and stopped this ridiculous tantrum. Signing this is the mature choice. It is time you grew up and learned how to compromise. The sheer unadulterated arrogance of the statement hit me like a physical strike. It was pure dramatic irony. I was sitting in a coffee shop holding the evidence of his felony fraud. He was one phone call away from a criminal investigation. Yet he was lecturing me about maturity. He was framing his desperate escape from justice as my submission to his wisdom. He needed me to believe I was losing so he could pretend he was winning. The hollow fatigue vanished. A raw, white-hot spite flared in my chest, burning away the exhaustion. The girl who desperately sought his approval died completely in that moment, replaced by a woman who realized mercy is wasted on a tyrant. I did not deliver a cinematic comeback. I did not yell. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I severed the connection mid-sentence, shutting off his voice mid-lecture. I picked up the settlement offer. I did not sign it. I ripped the document perfectly in half. I ripped it again. I stood up from the small corner table, gathered the shredded pieces of paper, and walked over to the coffee shop trash can. I dropped the confetti of his legal escape hatch into the garbage right on top of a discarded paper cup. I pulled out my phone and opened a text message to Marcus. "We go to court," I typed. "Do not accept the settlement. I want the judge to see everything." I hit send. I walked out onto Pearl Street, stepping into the bright Colorado sunshine. I was not going to let him steal my money and keep his pride. I was going to force him to stand in a public courtroom and face the mathematical reality of what he had done. I knew the legal system was flawed. I knew a trial would be grueling. But walking away, allowing him to rewrite history, was a price I was no longer willing to pay. The trap was set, and I was ready to watch the gavel fall. The Boulder County Courthouse is an imposing structure built from pale stone and heavy timber. It sits near the center of town, surrounded by manicured lawns and towering pine trees. Large windows in the hallways frame the jagged peaks of the Flatirons, turning the rugged landscape into a silent witness to the legal battles fought inside. The architecture is designed to make you feel small. It projects the overwhelming authority of the state. I walked through the heavy oak doors carrying a folder filled with 5 years of receipts, a forensic audit, and a handwritten speech. I was exhausted, but I was ready for my cinematic moment of triumph. I sat at the petitioner table next to Marcus. Greg and his attorney Barrett sat at the respondent table across the aisle. Lydia sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lucas did not show up. He was probably sitting in his low-do apartment, ignoring the fallout of the luxury lease I had subsidized. The judge presiding over the hearing was a woman in her late 50s. She had sharp, tired eyes and a demeanor that radiated zero tolerance for grandstanding. She did not look at us with sympathy or malice. She looked at us like we were a stack of paperwork standing in the way of her lunch break. She spent 20 minutes reviewing the forensic audit Marcus had submitted. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, broken only by the rustle of pages turning and the faint hum of the air conditioning. She scrutinized the bank transfer logs correlating my deposits to Lucas's auto lease. She examined the original residential lease agreement Greg had forced me to sign. She studied the forged signature on the HELOC application. She set the files down and folded her hands on the high wooden bench. "The evidence presented regarding the breach of fiduciary duty is unambiguous," the judge stated. Her voice was flat, projecting easily across the quiet room. A custodian operating under the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act is granted broad discretionary power to utilize funds for the benefit of the minor. However, the explicit synchronization of the minor's deposited earnings to fund a luxury vehicle lease for an adult sibling, combined with the execution of a commercial residential lease agreement, constitutes definitive self-dealing. She turned her gaze toward Greg. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. He did not look smug anymore. "I am ordering the immediate transfer of the unencumbered deed to the petitioner," the judge continued. "The temporary injunction against the respondent remains in effect regarding the physical premises. Furthermore, I am issuing a civil judgment against the respondent in the amount of $48,000 for the misappropriated funds plus reasonable attorney fees incurred by the petitioner." I felt a surge of adrenaline. The math had won. The court recognized the theft. I had the house and I had the financial judgment. I reached for the handwritten statement sitting on the table in front of me. I had spent hours drafting it on Chloe's sagging futon. It detailed the emotional abuse, the double shifts, the frozen commutes, the sheer terror of falling asleep at the wheel. I stood up, clutching the paper, ready to deliver the speech that would finally hold my father accountable for destroying my youth. Your Honor, I began, my voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. I would like to read a victim impact statement regarding the actions of the respondent over the last 5 years. I need the court to understand the profound emotional damage caused by his financial extortion. I need the court to know that he did not just take my money, he took my adolescence. Miss the judge interrupted. Her tone was not unkind, but it was firm and entirely dismissive. I stopped reading, looking up at the bench. This is a civil probate hearing regarding the administration of a UTMA asset, the judge stated flatly. I am ruling on the mathematical allocation of funds and the legal execution of fiduciary duties. I am not here to litigate your childhood. The court does not mandate apologies or address emotional grievances. Please sit down. The words felt like a physical slap. I snapped my mouth shut. A humiliating lump formed in my throat. I had waited 5 years for a public reckoning. I had survived grueling isolation, expecting the legal system to validate my suffering. Instead, the judge reduced my entire trauma to a line item on a spreadsheet. My pain was irrelevant to the law. I slowly lowered the handwritten speech and sank back into my leather chair, swallowing the bitter taste of an anticlimactic victory. The judge turned her attention to Marcus. Counsel, regarding your motion to refer the forged HELOC application to the district attorney for criminal fraud prosecution, I am denying that request. I jerked my head up, staring at the bench. Marcus stiffened beside me. Your Honor, we provided the forged document alongside the petitioner's verified signature. Marcus argued respectfully but firmly. The attempt to secure a 6-figure debt using a fraudulent signature is a criminal act, regardless of the civil fiduciary breach. I acknowledge the discrepancy in the signatures, the judge replied, resting her chin on her hand. However, the district attorney rarely pursues criminal charges in familial UTMA disputes involving a designated legal custodian. The broad discretionary powers granted to parents under the Act create too much legal gray area for a criminal conviction regarding intent to defraud a minor dependent. It is a messy standard of proof. The civil judgment for restitution is the appropriate remedy here. The respondent is ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. The court is adjourned. The gavel fell, a single sharp crack that signaled the end of the war. Greg would not go to jail. He would not face a criminal trial for forging my name. He was simply bankrupt, facing a massive civil judgment he could not pay without liquidating his own assets. The courtroom began to empty. Barrett packed his briefcase and whispered something to Greg before walking away. Greg stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked down the aisle without glancing in my direction. Lydia followed him. Her head bowed, her steps hurried and small. They were leaving my life exactly as they had existed in it, focused entirely on their own survival. Marcus turned to me, closing his file folder. "We won the house, Mia," he said quietly. "We got the judgment. It is a solid victory." I did not cheer. I did not glare triumphantly at the retreating backs of my parents. I did not feel powerful or vindicated. I sat in the hard wooden chair at the petitioner table and began to shiver violently. A deep, bone-chilling tremor racked my entire body. I dropped the unread impact statement onto the table. I buried my face in my hands, pressing my palms against my eyes until I saw flashes of light. The crushing weight of the legal system washed over me. It was a cold, mechanical machine that provided financial restitution but offered absolutely zero emotional closure. The court had given me a piece of paper declaring I was right, but it could not give me back the 5 years I spent scrubbing floors. It could not force my father to love me. It could not make my mother brave. I had won the war, but the battlefield was empty, and I was entirely alone. I sat there shivering in the quiet courtroom, realizing that surviving the abuse was only the first half of the battle. Now I had to figure out how to live in the aftermath. I had 72 hours before I could return to my property. I believed unlocking the front door of my house would finally bring the peace I desperately craved. I had no idea that my father had prepared one final petty act of cruelty to ensure my victory felt like a hollow ruin. I stood on the front porch of the property exactly 72 hours after the probate judge struck the gavel. The legal transfer was complete. The title was recorded with the county bearing my name alone. Marcus had handed me the brass key earlier that morning outside his brick office in the foothills. He offered a firm handshake and told me to change the locks immediately. I drove to the neighborhood and parked my rusted sedan in the driveway. The Colorado sun was bright, casting long afternoon shadows across the lawn. I held the key in my palm. The metal felt unnaturally heavy. I had spent 5 agonizing years dreaming about this specific moment. During every grueling double shift at the bakery and every terrifying commute on icy roads, I imagined the rush of triumphant joy I would feel when I finally claimed my home. I thought opening this door would feel like crossing the finish line of a marathon. I thought I would raise my hands and celebrate a definitive victory over the man who tried to ruin my future. I slid the key into the deadbolt and turned it. The lock clicked. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The triumphant joy never arrived. Instead, I walked into a hollow, echoing chamber. My boots clicked against the hardwood floor, and the sound reverberated off the bare drywall. I stopped in the entryway, staring into the living room. Greg and Lydia had not just vacated the premises. Out of pure petty spite, they had stripped the house to its bare bones. I walked slowly toward the kitchen. The large stainless steel refrigerator was missing, leaving behind a rectangular patch of dust and deep scuff marks on the floor where they had dragged it away. The gas oven was gone, leaving an empty gap between the granite countertops. I looked up at the ceiling. Every single light bulb had been unscrewed and removed from the recessed fixtures, leaving dark, empty sockets. I stepped closer to the wooden kitchen cabinets. The smooth surfaces looked strange. I reached out to touch the wood and realized why. Greg had taken a screwdriver and systematically removed every single brass handle and drawer pull in the entire kitchen. He had removed the hardware from the bathroom vanity. He had taken the curtain rods. The sheer effort required to dismantle a house to this degree was breathtakingly cruel. They must have spent hours unscrewing dozens of tiny metal fasteners in a frantic, desperate attempt to extract every last cent of value from the property before the deadline expired. It was a monument to his obsessive greed. He could not stand the thought of me enjoying a single functioning appliance or a simple light bulb. He wanted me to inherit a dark, empty shell. I stood in the center of the dismantled kitchen. A normal person might have panicked. A younger version of myself might have called him screaming about the theft. But the 5 years of survival and the 4 months of legal warfare had fundamentally rewired my brain. I did not scream. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket and opened the camera application. I took a photograph of the empty refrigerator alcove. I photographed the bare light fixtures. I took close-up shots of the kitchen cabinets showing the small empty holes where the brass handles used to be. I documented every stripped room and every dragged scuff mark. I opened my email and attached the images to a message addressed to Marcus. I typed a brief sentence explaining that my parents had looted the property upon vacating. I hit send and waited. My phone rang less than 3 minutes later. Marcus did not bother with a polite greeting. "Did they take the appliances and the fixtures?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. "Yes," I replied, walking back into the empty living room. "They took the oven, the fridge, the light bulbs, and the cabinet hardware. They stripped the place. I guess Greg wanted to punish me one last time." "He did not punish you," Mia Marcus stated, a distinct note of grim satisfaction entering his tone. "He just handed us a wrapped gift. Your father is a very arrogant man who clearly believes he is smarter than the judicial system. When the judge issued the emergency injunction to freeze the asset, that order legally protected the property and all its permanent fixtures. A house in real estate law includes the attached appliances and the hardware. By removing those items, he directly violated a strict court order." I paused, listening to the echo of my own breathing in the bare room. "What does that mean?" "It means he is in contempt of court," Marcus explained. "He removed frozen assets prior to the final execution of the deed transfer. I am filing a motion for sanctions right now. The judge who presided over your hearing has zero patience for litigants who play games with her injunctions." The legal machinery moved with terrifying speed when a judge felt personally disrespected. Marcus submitted the photographs and the motion for contempt before the courthouse closed that afternoon. The ruling was issued swiftly without the need for another drawn-out deposition. The judge found Greg in direct violation of the asset freeze. She did not order him to return the used appliances. Instead, she slapped him with a punitive financial sanction for blatant contempt of court. The penalty was non-negotiable and required immediate payment to the court registry. The fine was exactly $5,000. When Marcus called to tell me the amount, I had to sit down on the floor. $5,000. It was the exact numerical value of the check Greg had casually written in the kitchen to bail out Lucas and his failed startup venture. It was the exact amount that had sparked my realization that I was funding a lie. My father had tried to inflict a final petty wound, and the bureaucracy of the legal system had delivered flawless poetic justice. He lost the house, he lost the stolen rent money, and his parting act of spite cost him the precise sum he once used to prove my brother was more valuable than me. The legal war was officially over. The victory was secured. I drove to a local pizza parlor and bought a cheap cheese pizza. I carried the warm cardboard box back to the empty house. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dim shadows through the bare windows. Since there were no light bulbs, I had to rely on the fading natural light. I walked into the living room and sat down right in the middle of the bare hardwood floor. I opened the cardboard box. The smell of melted cheese and baked crust filled the sterile air. I pulled out a slice. It was already growing cold. I took a bite, chewing slowly in the profound quiet of the vacant room. A strange sensation washed over me. My chest hitched. A tight knot formed in my throat. I swallowed the food and took a ragged breath. I started to cry. I sat alone on the floor of a $500,000 asset and wept. The tears spilled over my cheeks, dropping onto the cardboard box. A wet, messy laugh escaped my lips, mixing with the sobs. I was crying and laughing at the same time, rocking back and forth on the hard wood. I was not crying because my parents took the refrigerator. I was not crying because I missed them. I was crying because the suffocating pressure was suddenly gone. Since I was 16 years old, my entire identity was built around surviving the next month. My brain was hardwired to calculate shift hours, calculate gas mileage, and calculate the mood of a tyrant just to keep a roof over my head. Every decision I made was dictated by the looming threat of the first of the month. I was a machine designed to endure. Now the machine had no purpose. The threat was eliminated. The house was mine. The debt was canceled. I looked around the empty living room and realized I had no idea how to exist as a normal 21-year-old. I did not know how to live without an enemy to fight. The freedom was vast and terrifying. I had to learn how to be a person instead of a shield. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of grease across my cheek. I took another bite of the cold pizza and stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I walked toward the back door. I stepped out onto the wooden back deck. The mountain air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. I leaned against the wooden railing and looked westward. The jagged silhouette of the Front Range dominated the horizon. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of crushed purple and deep orange, casting the rugged peaks in stark relief. The Colorado mountains stood silent and indifferent to the petty human dramas playing out below them. They were enduring and permanent. I took a deep breath, letting the freezing air fill my lungs. The empty house behind me was no longer a prison. It was a blank canvas. The stolen light bulbs and the missing hardware did not matter. I could buy new light bulbs. I could paint the walls. I could fill the rooms with people who actually cared about me. I did not have to earn my right to occupy space ever again. I watched the last sliver of sunlight dip below the mountain peaks, plunging the yard into deep twilight. I stood on my own deck, listening to the wind rustle through the evergreen trees. There were no demands. There were no ultimatums. The silence was absolute, and for the rest of my life, the silence belonged entirely to me. It has been 6 months since I sat on that bare hardwood floor eating cold pizza. The house looks different now. I spent the summer painting the walls a warm, soft white to erase the heavy, oppressive gray Greg favored. I bought new brass handles for the kitchen cabinets from a local hardware store in Boulder. They do not match the old ones, and I prefer it that way. Every time I open a drawer, the cool metal reminds me that I bought them with my own money on my own terms. Healing is not a cinematic montage. It is quiet, tedious work. Some nights I still wake up at 4 in the morning, my chest tight with a phantom panic that I missed a shift at the bakery or forgot to leave an envelope of cash on the counter. But the panic fades faster now. The silence of the house used to terrify me. Now it just feels like peace. Looking back at the wreckage of my family, I realize my grueling 5-year nightmare was a brutal education. I paid $48,000 for a masterclass in human nature. If you are listening to this, I want to share the 5 lessons I carved out of that dark period so you do not have to learn them the hard way. First, financial control disguised as parenting is just abuse in a suit. If someone demands your labor, your wages, or your youth to teach you a lesson about the real world, they are usually just subsidizing their own failures. True mentors build you up. Predators bleed you dry. Second, the legal system does not care about your broken heart. Courts do not deal in apologies, emotional closure, or moral victories. They deal in paper ledgers and math. If you find yourself in a war, your tears will not save you. Keep your receipts. Document every transaction. Tangible evidence is the only armor that holds up under cross-examination. Third, shared DNA is not a binding contract for servitude. You are not obligated to be collateral damage just because you share a last name with your abusers. Walking away from a toxic family is not an act of betrayal. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. You are allowed to change the locks. Fourth, spite is a notoriously expensive habit. My father's obsession with dominating me blinded him to his own legal peril. His petty decision to strip my kitchen cost him $5,000 in punitive fines. Arrogance will always hand a prepared opponent the exact weapon needed to win. Finally, survival is only the prologue. The hardest part of escaping a high-stress environment is learning how to exist in the quiet aftermath. When you spend years bracing for impact, peace feels unnatural. You have to actively give yourself permission to drop the shield, stop fighting, and figure out who you are outside of the war zone. I am 21 years old. I own my home. I drive a reliable car. I no longer smell like industrial bleach, and I never check my rearview mirror expecting to see my father's shadow. I built a sanctuary out of a crime scene. If you are sitting in the dark right now feeling trapped by the people who are supposed to protect you, I want you to know that the exit door exists. You just have to be willing to turn the handle. Thank you for listening to my story. If this narrative brought you clarity or strength, please take a second to subscribe to Orange Revenge. Drop a comment below and share which of these 5 lessons hit closest to home for you. Your support helps bring more of these stories to light. Keep fighting for your peace, and I will see you in the next video.